My husband secretly mortgaged our home to fund his new life with another woman. I caught him and burned his empire down, a Sophia vengeance story. Chapter 1. The Storm. I turned 68, in a house I was about to lose. I just didn't know it yet. Walter Callahan packed his last suitcase, while a nor'easter stripped the shutters from our windows. 40 years of marriage. 312 feet of Atlantic coastline. One forged signature on a mortgage I never authorized. He took all of it with him when he walked out the door. The storm started at 4 a.m. on December 14, my birthday. I know the exact time because the first gust hit the northeast corner of the house hard enough to rattle the china cabinet, and the humming woke me the way it always did. With my hand reaching across the bed for a body that should have been there. Walter's side was cold. Not recently vacated cold hours. Cold. The kind of cold that means someone made a decision in the dark and didn't wake you to say goodbye. I found him in the mudroom. 2 suitcases, the matching Navy set we'd bought for a trip to Boston in 2011 that we never took. 3 boxes sealed with packing tape, stacked by the garage door. His hands were steady. I noticed that a man whose hands shake is a man who feels something. Walter's hands were as still as a surgeon's. I'm leaving. Helen. Not I think we should talk. Not I've been unhappy. Just the fact. Delivered the way he delivered everything, like a weather report. Partly cloudy. Chance of rain. Your marriage is over. He told me about Brenda Hamill. 45 years old. Real estate agent. They'd met at the gym 8 months ago, the gym Walter had started going to in April. The gym I'd thought was about his cholesterol. He told me they'd been looking at apartments in Portland. He told me he'd already spoken to a lawyer. He offered what he called a fair split. Each of us would keep $80,000 in savings. I would keep the house. He would keep the marina, Callahan's Harbor Marina. The business I'd kept the books for since 1994. The business that had no revenue without the lobstermen, whose names I'd memorized, and whose invoices I'd filed for 3 decades. He said it as if $80,000 was a generous number. As if 40 years of marriage could be weighed on a kitchen scale and divided like flour. Happy birthday, Helen, he said. Not cruelly. Worse, indifferently. The way you say it to a coworker you barely know. Then he walked out the door. Into the nor'easter. And drove away in his truck, with Brenda Hamill's number saved in his phone, and my entire life packed into 3 boxes he hadn't bothered to label. I stood in the mudroom and listened to the storm take the shutters. In 48 hours, I would discover that the house he'd just given me wasn't mine to keep. But that morning, all I knew was that the wind was loud and the house was empty, and no one in the world was going to call me on my 68th birthday. The storm lasted 14 hours. Power went out at 6:17 a.m. I know, because the microwave clock froze at that number and stayed there, blinking, until the electricity returned at 8:42 p.m. 14 hours and 25 minutes of darkness, in a house that had never felt dark when someone else was in it. I didn't cry. I want to be clear about that, not because crying is weakness, but because what I felt wasn't sadness. It was something heavier. The specific gravity of realizing that every social connection you'd had for 4 decades was routed through a man who had just driven away. Walter's marina friends. Walter's Friday dinner couples. Walter Skim. My retirement 14 months earlier. At Walter's suggestion, it's time for us to enjoy our years together, he'd said. And my director, Constance Park, had looked at me over her reading glasses and asked, "Are you sure? You don't seem sure." I wasn't sure, but I went. The house showed his absence in small, precise ways. His rain jacket hook empty. The shelf where he kept fishing magazines dusty outline. One kitchen chair pulled out. The way he always left it. Except now, no one would push it back in. In the bedroom closet, his side was stripped clean hangers, swaying slightly from the last time they'd been touched. The navy duffel bag gone. 3 shoeboxes of photographs gone. Even his smell was already leaving Old Spice and engine grease. Evacuating the bathroom tile. Replaced by nothing, I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror and saw what Walter must have seen. A 68-year-old woman with silver hair and reading lines and hands that had maintained a house, a marriage, and a 38-year career at the Jessup Memorial Library without once asking for recognition. My sister lived in Bangor. We spoke at Christmas. My parents were dead. There was no one to call. And on the kitchen table, a manila envelope from a law office I didn't recognize sat unopened because I already knew what it contained, and I wasn't ready. The storm subsided. I lay on the sofa because the bedroom still smelled like his aftershave, and I couldn't bring myself to sleep in a bed that had been halved. No one came. Chapter 2, The 40 Years. I met Walter Callahan in 1984 at a town dance in Bar Harbor. I was 28. He was 32. Broad-shouldered from hauling traps, with a laugh that filled a room the way smoke fills a chimney upward. Warmly, making everything above it hazy. He owned a single lobster boat called the Margaret Ann. And he talked about the future, the way architects talk about blueprints with specifics. A fleet. A marina. A name that meant something on the waterfront. We married 6 months later. 43 guests. A cake from a bakery on Cottage Street that closed in 1997. I wore my mother's dress and carried a bouquet from the garden of a woman I no longer remember. And Walter promised me a life. And I promised him the same. And we both believed it. I had a manuscript. 214 pages. Typed on my mother's Olivetti Lettera 32. A novel about a lighthouse keeper's daughter. I'd been writing it since I was 25. In the hours after my library shifts. On the kitchen table of my first apartment. Walter knew about it. He said it was nice. A nice hobby. He said. But not a priority. The priorities were the boat engine that failed in January. The extra shifts I took at the library to cover the repair. The marina books I started managing in 1994 because the accountant Walter hired had made 3 errors in 1 quarter, and I found them all in an afternoon. 2000. Walter had his marina. 2005. He had his name on the waterfront. My manuscript sat in a plastic bin, buried under tax documents. And the query letters I'd sent to publishers between 1,988 and 1,991 stopped coming back because I'd stopped sending them. I worked at the Jessup Memorial Library for 38 years. I became head librarian. I read every book that came through the door and remembered most of them. I could tell you the publication date of Scuffy the Tugboat, 1946. Gertrude Crampton, The Way Other People Can Tell You a Batting Average. The library was mine in every way that mattered except legally, which is a distinction women of my generation understand better than we should. Walter asked me to retire 14 months before he left. I was 66. He said it was time for us. Constance Park asked if I was sure. I wasn't. I retired anyway. And spent the next 14 months reading 3 to 4 books a week in a house that grew quieter each month, while Walter went to a gym he'd never mentioned and came home smelling less like the ocean and more like something I couldn't name. I didn't know about Brenda. I didn't know about the mortgage. I didn't know that 11 months before he packed his suitcases, Walter had signed a document that put my name forged in his handwriting on a $200,000 loan against the house I thought was mine. But I would. Chapter 3. The Envelope. Dawn came on December 15 like an apology the sky didn't mean. The nor'easter had passed, leaving a silence that wasn't peace, but exhaustion. I woke on the sofa. Stiff. 68 years, announcing themselves in my knees and lower back. And put on Walter's old work boots, the only pair by the door. Now mine by abandonment, to survey the damage. 3 shutters ripped from the northeast face. A 4 by 6 foot section of roof edge peeled back over the bedroom. A spruce limb, the diameter of my waist blocking the driveway. The mailbox post tilted 15 degrees. The house, a Cape Cod built in 1967 by a fisherman named Amos Greenlaw. Cedar shingles. Steep roof. Fieldstone foundation, 57 years old, had held the way it always held. Because foundations built by fishermen in Maine are not decorative, they are functional. They are meant to bear weight. The property, 47 Ledgelawn Road. Ling. 73 acres. 312 feet of direct Atlantic frontage was valued, according to Walter's divorce documents, at $180,000. I would later learn that this number was a lie. But that morning, standing in borrowed boots with spruce needles in my hair, I didn't know anything except that the mailbox still worked, and inside it, between a Versant power bill and a drugstore circular, was a manila envelope from a law office called Driscoll and Burke. Portland. Men. I carried it to the kitchen table. Set it down. Made coffee 1 cup. For 1 person. In a machine built for 12. I didn't open the envelope. Not yet. Some things you make yourself ready for. The way you make yourself ready for cold water. 1 breath. Then the plunge. The next morning, December 16. 2 days after my birthday. 2 days after Walter, I opened it. 23 pages. A divorce petition. The terms were precise in the way that cruelty is often precise. The house at 47 Ledgelawn Road. Listed value, $180. Ling ling ling. Savings $80. $000 each. Callahan's Harbor Marina retained entirely by Walter. No division. No compensation for the 30 years I'd managed its books. Balanced its accounts. Memorized its clients. No alimony. No acknowledgement of a career I'd ended at his request. Or a manuscript I'd buried for his ambition. Or 40 years of invisible labor that had kept every surface of his life clean and warm and functional. The final page held a signature line. Helen M. Callahan. Acknowledge that I have read and understood the terms of this agreement and accept them freely and without coercion. I placed both hands flat on the kitchen table, the pine table, 6 feet long, scarred with knife marks and ring stains. Refinished by me twice. Recommended for replacement by Walter, twice. The table where I'd done the marina's taxes. The table where I'd eaten alone while Walter left at 5:30 for the water. The table that had held the invisible architecture of our marriage for 4 decades. I didn't sign. I washed my mug, hung the dish towel on its hook, and drove to the only place that had ever felt entirely mine. Chapter 4. The Pier. I didn't make it to the library. I was driving south on Route 3. Past the Seal Harbor turnoff. When something turned the wheel east toward the open Atlantic. Not a decision. An instinct, the kind that bypasses the brain and goes straight to the hands. The way a bird knows north without a compass. Town Pier. 3:47 p.m. The parking lot was empty. Every boat hauled for winter. Cradles stacked. A mist thickening over Frenchman Bay. And a winter storm warning for Hancock County, 12 to 18 inches. Gusts to 55 miles per hour. I got out of the truck. The cold was immediate, not the polite cold of a house with a draft, but the kind that goes to the marrow, the kind that makes your lungs reconsider the decision to keep working. I walked onto the pier anyway. At the far end, on a granite ledge, where the railing had been removed for winter repairs. A woman stood in a thin cardigan and house slippers. Looking down at the black water, I didn't think. That's the part people never understand. They ask, "What made you walk out onto that pier as though courage is a decision?" It isn't. It's what's left when thinking stops. The granite was slick with spray. Each step narrowed the world, the parking lot behind me. The harbor bell somewhere to my left. The wind pushing hard against my chest, like a hand telling me to go back. I didn't go back. The woman hadn't moved. She stood at the end of the pier where the ledge drops 3 feet to the waterline. Her cardigan flattened against her ribs. House slippers soaked through no coat. No scarf. Her hair silver white. Cut short above the ears, whipped across her face. And she didn't brush it away. She was staring at the water, the way you stare at a door you've already decided to walk through. "Mum." My voice cracked against the wind. "Mum. It's Helen. Helen Callahan." I didn't know why I said my full name. She didn't know me. But something in that moment demanded I be whole, not Walter's wife. Not the retired librarian. Not the woman who couldn't open an envelope for 36 hours. Helen Callahan. The entire person. She turned. Her eyes were dry. That scared me more than tears would have. Tears mean the body is still trying to process. Dry eyes mean the processing is done. "I know who you are," she said. Her voice was low. "Coastal Maine." Vowels rounded like beach stones. "You ran the library. 38 years. I brought my granddaughter to story hour. Tuesdays. She liked the one about the tugboat. Scuffy the tugboat. 1946. Gertrude Crampton. I'd read it so many times. The spine was held together with packing tape. "That's a good one," I said. I took another step. The granite was uneven here. Cracked where winter frost had worked into the seams over decades. I understood that kind of damage slow. Invisible. Then suddenly structural. "You should come away from the edge," I said. Not a command. A suggestion between two women who understood edges. She looked back at the water. The swells were 5 feet, maybe 6, rolling dark and heavy against the pilings. The temperature was 29 degrees. A body lasts 11 minutes in water that cold. I knew because I'd cataloged a Coast Guard pamphlet in 2011, and the number had stayed in my head the way certain facts do quietly. Until they matter. "My name is Ada," she said. "Ada Whitmore. My husband died in April. Pancreatic. 8 weeks from diagnosis to funeral." She paused. "My son sold the house in Northeast Harbor last month. Said I couldn't manage it alone. Moved me to Seaside Pines. You know what Seaside Pines is, I did. An assisted living facility on the Ellsworth Road. Clean. Modern. A faint smell of industrial lavender in every hallway. He took my car keys Tuesday." Ada continued. "Said the doctor recommended it." "The doctor didn't recommend it," I asked. She looked at me. And I recognized the expression because I'd seen it in my own bathroom mirror 40 hours ago. The face of a woman who has been made invisible by someone who promised to take care of her. "I'm not going to jump," Ada said quietly. "I just wanted to stand somewhere. No one could tell me to sit down." My chest unlocked. I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I was holding since I'd stepped out of the car. "Then stand," I said. "But take my coat." I unzipped the Rennie's parka, the one I'd bought with my own library salary in 2019. The one Walter said was too expensive at $49, and draped it over Ada Whitmore's shoulders. She didn't resist. The parka swallowed her. She was barely 5'2", maybe 105 pounds. And the cold had made her smaller. We stood at the end of the pier for 7 minutes without speaking. The harbor bell counted time. The snow began not gently, but all at once, as though someone had torn open a ceiling. "I have tea at my house," I said. "And a wood stove." Ada Whitmore looked at me. Then she stepped back from the edge. "I haven't had tea with anyone in 4 months," she said. We walked back together, the snow already filling our footprints behind us. And I thought 2 invisible women, 1 pier, nobody watching. But we saw each other, and that was enough to begin. Chapter 5. The Wood Stove. The drive from Town Pier to 47 Ledgelawn Road takes 9 minutes in good weather. That afternoon it took 22. The snow came sideways. Route 3, already white. And my windshield wipers, the ones Walter said he'd replace in October, streaked more than they cleared. Ada sat in the passenger seat with her hands folded in her lap. My Rennie's parka still zipped to her chin. She didn't speak. Neither did I. Some silences are awkward. This one was the other kind, the kind that means 2 people have agreed, without saying so, that words can wait. The wood stove in the living room is a irusine on 900, a suvoffiers jötule 500. Cast iron. Norwegian. Walter bought it the year we moved in, and never once cleaned the flue. I cleaned it every September. I mention this because it matters. The thing that kept our house warm for 40 years was maintained by the person who was now, according to a 23-page document on the kitchen table, worth exactly $80,000. I loaded 2 splits of yellow birch and 1 of ash. The ash catches faster, the birch holds longer. Ada watched me from the doorway, the way you watch someone perform a skill you've forgotten you once had. "I used to keep a stove," she said, "in Northeast Harbor, a Vermont Castings Defiant. Green enamel. Good stove. Robert, my husband," he said wood heat was inefficient. He was an engineer. Everything had to be efficient. A pause. He was efficient about dying. 2. 8 weeks. Didn't waste a single day being hopeful. I handed her a mug. Earl Grey. Loose leaf. The tin I keep behind the flower canister, because Walter thought loose tea was pretentious. The mug was white with a chip on the rim. I gave her the unchipped one. She noticed. "You don't have to give me the good mug," Ada said. "It's not the good mug. It's the only mug without a crack." She almost smiled. Almost. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd read Walter's divorce petition that morning, where I'd balanced the Marina's books for 3 decades, where I'd eaten 11,000 solitary breakfasts while Walter left at 5:30 for the water. The table was pine, 6 feet long, scarred with knife marks and ring stains. I'd refinished it twice. Walter had suggested replacing it twice. I won both times. "Your husband," Ada said carefully. "The Marina man, Walter. He left 2 days ago. My birthday." She set her mug down. "On your birthday?" 68. Jesus. Ada Whitmore. I would learn. Only invoked the Lord's name for genuine atrocities. She used it sparingly and meant it every time. The fire ticked and settled. Outside. The nor'easter erased the driveway. My son, Kenneth, is a financial planner in Boston, Ada said. He handled Robert's estate after the funeral. Told me the house in Northeast Harbor was worth $320,000. Sold it in 6 weeks. I saw the listing after closing. The buyer paid $490,000. She looked at her tea. Kenneth kept the difference. Said it covered management fees. $170,000. Her own son. I thought about Walter's divorce petition. The house at 47 Ledgelawn Road. Valued at $180,000. 312 feet of Atlantic coastline. In Bar Harbor. In a market where waterfront property hadn't sold below $400,000 in a decade. Ada, I said slowly. Do you know what a house with 300 feet of ocean frontage is worth in this town? She looked up. I do, she said. I was a real estate appraiser for 26 years before I married Robert. The wood stove cracked. A log shifted. The kitchen filled with the smell of birch and ash, and something else, the unmistakable scent of a lie catching fire. I pushed Walter's divorce papers across the table. Tell me what you see, I said. Ada Whitmore put on her reading glasses, turned to page 4, and placed one finger on the property valuation line. I see fraud, she said. Ada Whitmore read Walter's divorce petition the way I used to read damaged books slowly, with both hands, turning each page at the corner so the spine wouldn't crack further. She'd asked for a pencil. I gave her one a no. Dos Dixon Ticonderoga. Sharpened. The kind I'd kept in a ceramic cup on my library desk for 38 years. She held it the way surgeons hold scalpels. Precisi. No wasted motion. It took her 41 minutes. I know because the kitchen clock, a brass ship's clock Walter had mounted above the stove in 1996, ticked loud enough to hear between the wood stove's settling logs. I didn't interrupt. I washed the 2 mugs, dried them, refilled the kettle, and sat back down. Ada had turned to page 4, 3 separate times. Page 4 was the property valuation. Who appraised this house? She asked without looking up. I don't know. Walter Henley stopped. Walter handled everything. That was the architecture of our marriage he handled. I maintained. He decided. I adjusted. He moved forward. I stayed in place and called it loyalty. There's no appraiser's name. Ada said. No license number. No comparable sales attached. No square footage breakdown. No lot survey reference. She tapped the pencil against the page. In 26 years, I never once submitted a valuation without at least 4 comparables within a 1-mile radius and a 12-month window. This document has 0. She flipped to page 19. A signature line. Below it. In small type valuation, provided by Hamill and Associates Real Estate. Bar Harbor. Men. Brenda Hamill. Walter's girlfriend. The woman he'd left me for on my 68th birthday had also appraised the house she was helping him take from me. Hamill. Ada said, tapping the name. I know that office. Cottage Street. Above the ice cream shop. She handles seasonal rentals. Vacation properties. She is not a licensed appraiser. She's a sales agent. In the state of Maine, a real estate agent cannot perform a formal property appraisal for legal proceedings. That requires a Maine licensed residential appraiser credential under Title 32. Chapter 124. She said this the way I might say Scuffy the tugboat. 1946. Gertrude Crampton from memory. Without effort. Because knowledge that defines your life doesn't fade just because someone takes your car keys. Ada pulled a blank sheet from the notepad by my telephone and began writing. Her handwriting was small. Square. Architectural. Your lot is .73 acres. 312 feet of direct Atlantic frontage. No easement. Zoned residential waterfront. In Bar Harbor. December 2024. Comparable waterfront sales, she paused. Eyes narrowing. Calculating from a mental database that 26 years of fieldwork had built. 14 Ocean Drive. Sold September. .6 acres. 280 feet frontage. Assessed at $395,000. 7 Schooner Head Road. Sold July. .8 acres. Similar condition. $410,000. She wrote the numbers in a column. Drew a line. Added the house Cape Cod. 640 square feet. Original fieldstone foundation. Replaced roof, 2018. I'd paid for that. 2. From the library account. Updated electrical 2014. Conservative estimate. Ada said. 340,000. Possibly 360, with the shoreline access and the deep water mooring rights. Walter registered in 2009. $340,000. Walter's petition said 180. The difference, $160,000, sat between us on the pine table, like a third person in the room. He's stealing your house, Ada said. And his girlfriend wrote the permission slip. The wood stove exhaled. Snow piled against the kitchen window in a long diagonal drift. The brass clock read 6:28 p.m. I need a lawyer, I said. You need a specific kind of lawyer, Ada corrected. One who handles real estate fraud. Not just divorce. And one who isn't afraid of Walter Callahan's marina friends. She wrote a name on the notepad, tore it off, and slid it across the table. Thomas McAllister. Esq. 19 Mount Desert Street. Bar Harbor. 207-288-4457. How do you know him? I asked. He handled my husband's estate. Before Kenneth took everything, Ada removed her reading glasses and folded them into her cardigan pocket. Tom McAllister doesn't lose. I looked at the name, at the phone number, at the pencil marks on Walter's petition, and the column of numbers that proved my house, my 40-year house. My refinished table. Cleaned flue. Replaced roof house was worth almost twice what my husband claimed. I picked up the phone. It was the first call I'd made in 3 days that wasn't to silence. Chapter 6. The Lawyer. Thomas McAllister's office occupied the second floor of a clapboard building on Mount Desert Street that had been a sail loft in 1891 and a dentist's office in 1954. The staircase was narrow, the banister worn smooth by a century of hands, and the landing smelled of cedar and old paper. I climbed those stairs on December 17, 3 days after my birthday. 3 days after Walter, and my knees reminded me of every one of my 68 years. Ada had offered to come. I'd said no. Some doors you walk through alone. Not because you're brave, but because the thing on the other side is yours to face. Thomas McAllister was 61. Lean. Silver-haired. With a beard trimmed close enough to look deliberate and long enough to look like he didn't care what you thought about it. His desk was oak, buried under files. Behind him, a window overlooked Frenchman Bay. And on the sill sat a brass sextant that I suspected had never been used for navigation but said everything about the man who displayed it, a person who believed in knowing exactly where you stood. Mrs. Callahan. He didn't stand. He gestured to the chair across from him. Ada Whitmore called me last night. Twice. The second time at 11:40. She said you'd been robbed by your husband and that I should clear my mourning. She wasn't exaggerating. Ada never exaggerates. It's one of her few flaws. Sit down. I placed Walter's divorce petition on his desk. Ada's pencil notes were still in the margins, the comparables, the statute number, the circled absence of an appraiser's license. McAllister opened it to page 4. Read Ada's figures. And nodded once. She's right about the valuation. Hamill isn't licensed. This appraisal is inadmissible. He made a note. But that's not why Ada called me twice. He opened his own file, a manila folder. Already thick. With a red tab. My name was on it. Callahan. Helen. How do you already have a file on me? I asked. I don't have a file on you. Mrs. Callahan. I have a file on your husband. The room contracted. The bay outside the window went flat and gray. 3 months ago, Walter Callahan took a mortgage on 47 Ledgelawn Road through Penobscot Savings, the Ellsworth branch. $200,000. 30-year term. Variable rate. McAllister turned the folder toward me. The application lists both names. Walter R. Callahan and Helen M. Callahan. Both signatures appear on page 6. He slid the page across the oak desk. I looked at my name. At the signature beside it, the H was too tall. The loops on the double L were rounded where mine are angular. The K in Callahan leaned left. My K has never leaned left in 68 years of writing it. I didn't sign this. I said, I know. How do you know? Because Ada faxed me your signature from the Jessup Memorial Library's 2019 employee renewal form at 6 this morning. I compared them before you sat down. He placed both documents side by side. The forgery was obvious once you knew where to look like water damage behind wallpaper. Invisible until someone pulls the corner. $200,000. I repeated, disbursed September 14th. The funds were deposited into a business account, Callahan's Harbor Marina, L.C. From there, $145,000 was transferred to a second account at Camden National Bank, held jointly by Walter R. Callahan and Brenda L. Hamill. $145,000. To his girlfriend. Through the marina I'd kept the books for. There's more. McAllister said. He didn't say it gently. He said it the way a doctor says there's more when the first scan wasn't the bad news. The marina carries a separate debt, $150,000 in commercial loans. Accumulated over 6 years. Payments are 4 months behind. 2 creditors have filed preliminary liens. He closed the folder. If those liens convert, they attach to all assets held under Walter's name, including the house. I sat in Thomas McAllister's chair, in a sail loft above Mount Desert Street, and added the numbers the way I'd added marina invoices for 30 years. Fraudulent mortgage, $200. Ling ling ling. Transferred to Brenda Hamill, $145. Ling ling ling. Marina debt, $150. Ling ling ling. Understated home value, $160. Ling ling ling. Total exposure, $655,000. I had $80,000 in savings and a house with no lock on the front door because Walter said Bar Harbor didn't need locks. What are my options? I asked. McAllister leaned back. The sextant caught the winter light. Option 1. You sign his petition. Take the $80,000 and lose everything else. Option 2. You fight. We contest the divorce terms. Void the forged mortgage. File criminal fraud charges with the Hancock County DA. And pursue civil recovery against both Walter and Ms. Hamill. He paused. Option 2 is loud. Option 2 is public. Option 2 means the entire town of Bar Harbor knows what Walter Callahan did. The entire town already thinks I'm the woman whose husband left her for someone younger. That's true. Then they might as well know the rest. McAllister opened a drawer. Removed a retainer agreement, 2 pages. Clean type. No fine print, and placed it beside a pen. My retainer is $2,500. He said. Ada already paid it this morning. I looked at him. She said to tell you it's not charity. McAllister added. It's an investment in a woman who gave her a coat on a pier. I signed the retainer. My K did not lean left. Chapter 7. The Lighthouse. Ada Whitmore showed up at my door on December 19 with a thermos of coffee, a bag of Jordan cinnamon donuts from Cottage Street, and a question I wasn't prepared for. When was the last time you drove out to Bass Harbor Head? I had to think. 5 years. Maybe 6. Walter and I had gone for a sunset, once one of those things couples do when they've run out of words but haven't yet admitted it. He'd stayed in the truck. I'd walked to the railing and stood there until the light swept past me 3 times. Counting the interval. 4 seconds on. 4 seconds off. The rhythm of something reliable. Why, I asked. Get your coat. The drive from Bar Harbor to Bass Harbor takes 35 minutes on Route 102. Winding through Somesville and past the head of Somes Sound, the only fjord on the eastern seaboard. Though the geologists argue about the definition, and always will. Ada drove. She'd gotten her car keys back. I didn't ask how. I suspected Thomas McAllister had made a phone call to Kenneth in Boston. And I suspected Kenneth had not enjoyed it. Bass Harbor Headlight sits on a granite ledge at the southern tip of Mount Desert Island. Built in 1858. Automated in 1974. The tower is white. 26 feet. With a red-capped lantern room. The keeper's house is connected a modest cape with cedar shingles weathered to the color of driftwood. The Coast Guard decommissioned the living quarters in 2018. Since then, the house had stood empty. I knew this, the way everyone in Bar Harbor knew it as background knowledge. A fact without urgency. Like knowing the church bell rings at noon. But Ada hadn't brought me here for the view. She parked in the empty lot. No tourists in December. The access path was icy, dusted with last week's snow, and the wind off Blue Hill Bay cut through my parka with surgical precision. We walked in silence past the wooden railing, past the trail markers, until we stood at the chain-link fence that separated the public path from the keeper's house. The house was deteriorating. I could see it with the eyes I'd been born with, and the knowledge 40 years beside the ocean had given me. Cedar shingles curling at the edges, moisture infiltration. 2 windows on the north face boarded with plywood that had already begun to delaminate. The foundation granite block, original 1,858, showed 3 visible cracks, each running diagonally, which meant settling. Which meant water had been freezing and expanding in those joints for years. The front door was padlocked with a GSA federal lock, but the casing had pulled away from the frame by nearly an inch. One hard storm, and that door would open on its own. She's dying. I said. I didn't mean to say it aloud. She's been dying for 6 years. Ada said. The Coast Guard transferred the property to the town in 2020 under the National Historic Lighthouse Preservation Act. The town accepted it with a maintenance covenant minimum annual investment of $40,000. You want to know how much Bar Harbor has spent in 6 years? I waited. $12,000. Total. 1 roof patch in 2021 and an emergency electrical disconnect in 2023 after a nor'easter took out the junction box. Ada pulled a folded document from her coat. I requested this from the town clerk's office yesterday. It's the current property file. She handed it to me. On the second page, under Development Inquiries, a single entry, Oct. 3. 2024 inquiry from Harborview Development Partners. LC. Re-potential acquisition and conversion of Bass Harbor Head Light Station to boutique hospitality property. Contact Walter R. Callahan. Managing partner. I read it twice. Then a third time. Because the letters kept rearranging themselves into shapes I didn't want to recognize. Walter. My Walter. Managing partner of a company I'd never heard of. Inquiring about buying a lighthouse I'd loved since I was 12 years old. To turn it into a hotel. Harborview Development Partners. Ada said. Registered in Augusta on August 22nd. 2 members listed. Walter R. Callahan and Brenda L. Hamill. The wind came hard off the bay, and the lighthouse stood there, absorbing it the way it had absorbed every storm for 166 years. Patient. Cracked. Still standing. I folded the document and put it in my pocket. "How do we save it?" I said. Ada Whitmore smiled for the first time since I'd known her. It was a small smile. Careful. Like a window being opened in a house that had been closed too long. "I was hoping you'd say that." Ada and I spent the next 4 days turning my kitchen table into a war room. I say that casually now. But on December 19, the afternoon, we came back from Bass Harbor Head. I didn't know what a war room looked like. By December 23, I did. It looks like a pine table covered in bank statements. Yellow legal pads. 2 laptops borrowed from the Bar Harbor Public Library's technology lending program. A printer that jammed every 9 pages. And a woman who hadn't been allowed to manage her own finances in 40 years, discovering she was very, very good at it. Ada brought the system. 26 years of appraisal work had taught her how money moves through real estate, the deposits, the draws, the title transfers, the gaps where fraud hides like rot behind clapboard. I brought the data. 30 years of keeping Walter's Marina books meant I knew every account number, every routing number, every quarterly filing he'd submitted to the state since 1994. He'd never changed the passwords. He hadn't thought he needed to. I was retired, invisible, and, in his estimation, incurious. He was wrong about the last part. The first thing we found was the joint savings. Walter and I had maintained a shared account at Bar Harbor Banking and Trust since 1985. On September 3, 11 days before the forged mortgage was signed, Walter had withdrawn $45,000 in a single cashier's check, payable to Harborview Development Partners, LC. The memo line read Operating Capital Phase 1, $45,000 from our shared savings. Without my signature, without my knowledge, the bank's withdrawal policy required dual authorization for amounts exceeding $10,000 on joint accounts. Somehow, Walter had bypassed it. Ada circled the transaction in red and wrote one word beside it: complicit. Someone at that bank helped him. She said, "You don't move $45,000 from a joint account without a teller and a branch manager looking the other way." I wrote down the branch Bar Harbor Banking and Trust. Main Street. The manager's name was Gerald Foss. I knew Gerald. He'd come to the library every Tuesday for 3 years to check out Louis L'Amour westerns. I'd recommended Hondo to him in 2016. He'd said it changed his life. The second thing we found was the Marina's books. Walter had taken 3 commercial loans over 6 years through Acadia Business Credit, a small lender in Ellsworth. The amount $62,000 in 2018, $43,000 in 2020, and $45,000 in 2022. Total $150,000. The collateral listed on all 3 applications was identical residential property. 47 Ledgelawn Road, Bar Harbor. Me. My house. Used as collateral for business loans I never agreed to. Each application carried 2 signatures. Walter's was genuine. Mine was not. The same left-leaning K. The same rounded double L. 3 forgeries across 6 years. Each one a door Walter had opened with my name and walked through alone. He's been practicing, Ada said quietly. The 2018 signature is rough. The letter spacing is wrong. B2022. It's almost perfect. He got better at being you. That sentence sat in the room for a long time. The third thing we found was Brenda. Ada pulled the Hancock County Registry of Deeds and Cross, referenced every transaction Hamill and Associates had brokered in the past 18 months. 14 sales. Normal enough for a small coastal agency. But 3 of those sales shared a pattern. The listed purchase price was 15 to 20% below the town's assessed value. And in each case, the buyer was a recently formed LLC with a registered agent in Augusta. One of those LLCs was Harborview Development Partners. The other two were Acadia Coastal Holdings, LLC, and Mount Desert Capital Group, LLC. Ada searched the Secretary of State's database. All three shared the same registered agent, a paralegal named Denise Callahan Rowe. Denise Callahan, I said. That's Walter's sister. Ada removed her glasses. She pressed her thumb and forefinger against the bridge of her nose, a gesture I'd come to recognize as the one she made when a number confirmed what she'd already suspected. Helen, she said, this isn't a divorce. This is an operation. Your husband, his girlfriend, and his sister have been moving money through shell companies for at least 18 months. The lighthouse is just the latest acquisition. There may be more. She was right. There were more. We just didn't know how many yet. I taped a blank sheet of paper to the kitchen wall above the table and wrote 3 columns, known, suspected, unknown. Under known, I listed forged mortgage $200K. Joint account withdrawal $45K. Marina loans $150K. Understated appraisal $160K gap. 3 shell LLCs. Denise Callahan, Rowe registered agent. Gerald Foss, bank manager. Possible complicit under suspected additional below-market property purchases. Brenda's commission kickbacks. Walter's equity in lighthouse conversion. Under UNK known, total number of properties. Total dollar amount. Who else was involved? The list filled the page. I stood back and looked at it. The way you look at a wall you've stripped down to the studs, everything exposed. Nothing decorative. Just the bones of the thing you thought you knew. We need to tell McAllister. I said, already called him. Ada replied. Phone in hand. He's coming tomorrow. And he's bringing a forensic accountant. Christmas Eve. Thomas McAllister was coming to my kitchen on Christmas Eve to review evidence that my husband had built an empire of fraud using my name as the foundation. I looked at the war room table, the bank statements, the legal pads, the 3 forged signatures lined up in chronological order, each one a better copy of me than the last. Happy Holidays. Chapter 8. Christmas. Thomas McAllister arrived at 47 Ledgelawn Road on Christmas Eve at 9:14 a.m. with a woman I hadn't expected and a box of files I hadn't requested. The woman was June Pelletier, 53. French-Canadian, from the St. Four. John Valley. Degree in Forensic Accounting from the University of Maine. 17 years with the IRS Criminal Investigation Division before she'd left federal service and moved to Blue Hill to raise goats and dismantle financial fraud on her own terms. She wore no jewelry, no makeup, and boots that had seen actual mud. She shook my hand with a grip that suggested she'd spent the morning splitting firewood, which I would later learn she had. I don't do pleasantries, June said, setting a canvas bag on my kitchen table beside Ada's legal pads. Show me the accounts. Ada liked her immediately. I could tell because Ada handed her the good mug without being asked. June Pelletier worked the way weather works steadily. Without apology. Impossible to interrupt. She opened her own laptop. Connected to the library's mobile hotspot, Ada had checked out on her card and began pulling records I didn't know were publicly accessible. Corporate filings. UCC lien searches. Hancock County property transfers, going back 36 months. IRS, Form 1099 patterns. She moved between databases the way I used to move between library stacks by instinct. By architecture. By knowing where things were supposed to be and noticing when they weren't. By noon, she'd built a spreadsheet. 14 columns, 47 rows. Each row was a transaction. Each column was a data point date. Amount. Originating account. Receiving account. Signatory. Property address. LLC name. Registered agent. Broker of record. Commission paid. Assessed value. Sale price. And the column that mattered most, variance. Variance. June explained, not looking up, is the distance between what something is worth and what someone said it was worth. In legitimate transactions, variance is noise. In fraud, variance is the signal. The signal was loud. 3 properties Brenda Hamill had brokered through Hamill and Associates showed variances between 15 and 22% below assessed value. In each case, the buyer was one of Walter's shell LLCs. In each case, Brenda had collected her standard 6% commission, but June found a second payment. A separate wire transfer from the purchasing LLC back to an account at Camden National Bank listed under B. L. Hamill Consulting. Consulting. June said. The word flat is slate. That's what we call it when you want to hide a kickback in plain sight. 3 properties. 3 consulting fees. The amount's $18. 苏北21美元. Lubei 15美元. Lambay. Total kickbacks to Brenda Hamill $55,000. $200. June added them to the spreadsheet. Then she leaned back in my kitchen chair, the one Walter used to sit in. The one I hadn't moved since he left, and read the totals aloud. Forged mortgage on this residence. $200,000. Cashier's check from joint savings, $45,000. 3 commercial loans using forged spousal signatures, $150,000. Understated home appraisal. Estimated loss to Mrs. Callahan, $160,000. Kickback commissions to Brenda Hamill, $55,000. $200. She looked at me over her reading glasses. That's $610,000. $200 in documented fraud. And I've only been here 3 hours. McAllister stood by the window, arms crossed, watching the harbor. He hadn't spoken in 40 minutes. When he did, his voice was the low, careful tone of a man selecting his words, the way a carpenter selects nails the right size. The right angle. Nothing wasted. June. The marina debt. Leah. $150,000. 2 creditors, Acadia Business Credit and Northeast Equipment Leasing. Preliminary liens filed November 8th and November 19th. If they convert to judgment liens, they attach to all real property under Walter Callahan's name. She paused. Including this house. Including any interest he claims in the lighthouse property, if the town sale proceeds. Total exposure, $760,000. $200. I'd made $38,000 a year as head librarian. It would have taken me 20 years to earn what Walter had stolen in 18 months. McAllister turned from the window. We file in January, he said. Criminal complaint with the Hancock County DA. Civil suit in Superior Court. And a formal objection to the lighthouse sale with the Bar Harbor Town Council, citing fraudulent financing and conflict of interest. He looked at me. You'll need to speak at the council meeting. Publicly. In front of your neighbors. When January 14th. Town Council meets the 2nd Tuesday of every month. 7 p.m. Emerson Hall. 3 weeks. 21 days. To prepare a case against the man I'd slept beside for 40 years. His girlfriend. His sister. And possibly a bank manager who owed me a favor for Hondo. I'll be there, I said. June Pelletier closed her laptop and reached for one of Jordan's donuts. Ada had brought a fresh bag. "Mrs. Callahan," June said, chewing thoughtfully. "In 17 years at the IRS, I investigated 412 cases. You know what the common thread was." I shook my head. "The wives always kept better records than the husbands. Always." She took another bite. "You kept those Marina books for 30 years. That's not just evidence. That's a weapon." Ada poured more coffee. McAllister pulled a chair to the table. Outside, snow fell on Bar Harbor, the way it falls every Christmas Eve, softly, relentlessly, covering everything equally. The beautiful and the rotten alike. But inside my kitchen, the table was clear. The numbers were visible. And for the first time in 40 years, the books were mine. June Pelletier left at 2. McAllister followed at 2:30. His briefcase heavier than when he'd arrived. Ada stayed. She'd been staying more than leaving lately. And neither of us acknowledged this the way you don't acknowledge a tide. It just comes in. And you adjust? By 4 o'clock, the kitchen was clean. The spreadsheets were filed in a manila folder labeled Deck 24 Pelletier, stored in the fireproof lockbox Ada had bought from the Ellsworth Walmart for $39. The war table was just a table again. I set 2 plates, 2 forks, 2 cloth napkins I hadn't used since Walter's last birthday dinner, the one where he'd opened a card from Brenda he thought I hadn't seen. I made haddock chowder. Not from a recipe. From memory. My mother's memory. Technically, passed down the way coastal women pass everything down standing beside each other in a kitchen. Measuring nothing. Tasting everything. Heavy cream. Salt pork rendered until the fat went clear. Potatoes cut small so they'd break apart and thicken the broth. Ada peeled the potatoes without being asked. She peeled them the way she did everything efficiently. No wasted motion. The skin coming off in one continuous ribbon. Robert used to say my potato peeling was the most impressive thing about me. Ada said. I think he meant it as a compliment. Did it feel like one? It felt like being reduced to a skill. We ate in silence. Good silence. The wood stove ticked. The harbor was invisible behind the snow. But I could hear the bell, 4-second intervals. Steady. Like a heartbeat belonging to something larger than either of us. At 6:47 p.m., someone knocked on the front door. I wasn't expecting anyone. In 40 years of marriage, Christmas Eve visitors meant one thing. Walter's fishing friends dropping off a bottle of Allen's coffee brandy and leaving before the small talk ran out. But Walter was gone. And his friends had gone with him. Loyalty in Bar Harbor follows the boat. Not the house. I opened the door. The man on my porch was 74. Broad across the shoulders in a way that meant decades of hauling. Not hours at a gym. He wore a canvas jacket, rubber boots, and a knit cap pulled down to eyebrows that were white and thick as frost. His face was weathered to the color of old rope. He held a paper bag in one hand and his cap in the other. He'd removed it before I opened the door, which told me everything about the generation he came from. Mrs. Callahan. I'm Hank Sorrento. I captained the Abigail Rose out of Bass Harbor. He cleared his throat. I heard what Walter did. The whole harbor heard. Sound carries on water. And bad news carries faster. He held out the paper bag. Inside a mason jar of fish chowder darker than mine. Tomato-based. Portuguese style, and a loaf of bread wrapped in wax paper. My wife, Helen, made the bread. She said to tell you it's sourdough, and the starter is 42 years old. Which she mentions to everyone. A pause. She passed in 2019. I still use the starter. Seemed wrong to let it die. I took the bag. My throat was doing something inconvenient. Captain Sorrento Hank. Hank, would you like to come in? He looked past me into the kitchen. Saw Ada at the table. The two plates. The wood stove glow. He hesitated the way men of his generation hesitate at doorways, not from reluctance, but from a learned belief that they might be imposing. I won't stay long, he said. But I wanted to tell you something about that lighthouse. He sat at the kitchen table, 3 people now. Where for 40 years there had been 2, and recently 1. Ada poured him coffee. He wrapped both hands around the mug and looked at me with eyes the color of deep water. I've fished past Bass Harbor Head for 51 years. Hank said. My father fished it before me. That light has guided every boat in this harbor home since 1858. It's not a building. Mrs. Callahan. It's a promise. He set the mug down. And I'll be damned if Walter Callahan turns it into a hotel. The wood stove cracked. Ada's pencil was already moving. Outside. Christmas Eve snow buried the driveway in a silence that felt, for the first time in 11 days, like peace instead of absence. Hank, I said, do you know other people who feel the way you do about that lighthouse? He almost laughed. It came out as a short exhale through his nose. The main version of amusement. Mrs. Callahan. I know every lobsterman, urchin diver, scallop dragger, and harbor pilot from Bass Harbor to Winter Harbor. I've pulled lines beside them for half a century. He looked at me. You tell me when and where. I'll fill the room. Ada wrote on her legal pad Jan 14. Emerson Hall. Yedipeme. She tore the page off and slid it across the table to Hank Sorrento. He folded it once, put it in his jacket pocket, and nodded. Merry Christmas. Mrs. Callahan. Merry Christmas. Hank. He left at 2 p.m. The sourdough bread was still warm. The starter was 42 years old and still alive. Which, if you thought about it, was its own kind of miracle. Some things survive not because they're strong, but because someone keeps feeding them. That night, I slept in my own bed for the first time since Walter left. The sheets were cold. The pillow beside mine was empty. But downstairs, the wood stove held its heat. The lockbox held its secrets. And on the kitchen table, beside a mason jar of Portuguese chowder, Ada's legal pad held a name and a date and a time. January 14th. Emerson Hall. 7 p.m. The room would be full. I was sure of it. Because Hank Sorrento didn't make promises he couldn't keep. He was a fisherman. He understood tides and patience and the difference between a storm that destroys and a storm that cleans. This storm was going to clean. Chapter 9. The Confrontation. I didn't plan to go to the marina. The body has its own calendar. And on December 27, 13 days after my birthday, 13 days after Walter Mine drove south on Route 3, turned left onto Harbor Drive, and parked in the gravel lot of Callahan's Harbor Marina, before my brain could file an objection. The marina in winter is a graveyard of purpose. Boats hauled and shrink-wrapped. Cradles lined up like white coffins on the hard stand. The fuel dock locked. The bait shack shuttered with plywood that Walter had nailed himself in October. I recognized his hammering pattern. 3 quick strikes, followed by 1 hard finish. The same rhythm he'd used on every project for 40 years. Even his destruction had a signature. His truck was parked by the office, a 2019 Ford F-250. Silver. Salt corroded along the wheel wells. Beside it, a white Audi Q5 I didn't recognize. Brenda's. I knew because the license plate frame read Hamill and Associates, your coastal home awaits. Even her car was an advertisement. I sat in my truck for 4 minutes. I counted them on the dash clock. 4 minutes to decide whether I was here to confront or to confirm. They're different things. Confrontation is loud. Confirmation is quiet. I chose quiet. The marina office is a 12 by 20 building. Walter built in 1997 from salvaged dock lumber. I'd painted it twice, Nantucket gray with white trim. Because Walter said it looked professional, and I was the one who made things look the way Walter said they should look. The door was unlocked. Sound carries through salvaged lumber the way it carries on water faithfully. I heard them before I saw them. Walter's voice first. Low. Confident. The voice he used for business. The one that had charmed boat owners and bank managers and, apparently, real estate agents, half his age for years. The council won't block it. Foss already spoke to 2 members. The lighthouse property transfers in February, if the vote goes through January 14th. After that, Denise files the LLC conversion, and we break ground by April. Brenda's voice. Higher. Faster. Anxious in a way that pleased a part of me I'm not proud of. And Helen Tom McAllister pulled her credit reports last week. Someone at the bank told Gerald. A pause. Then Walter. Colder now. The temperature dropping the way it drops on open water before a squall. Helen doesn't have the money to fight this. She has $80,000 and a house that's about to have 2 liens on it. McAllister is a small-town lawyer with a sextant on his desk. He's not a threat. I stood in the hallway between the office door and the back storage room. And I listened to my husband of 40 years dismiss me in 12 seconds. Not with anger. Not with guilt. With arithmetic. He had calculated my irrelevance and found it confirmed. I could have left. I should have left. The smart play, the McAllister play. The June Pelletier play was to collect intelligence silently and present it in court. But there is a limit to silence. 40 years of it. And you learn exactly where that limit is. I opened the door. Walter sat behind the metal desk I'd organized every January for 3 decades. Brenda stood by the window. Coat on. Car keys in hand. As if she'd been about to leave or wanted to look like she had been. The room smelled of diesel and coffee and the particular staleness of a space where bad decisions are made comfortably. Walter's face went through 4 expressions in 2 seconds. Surprise. Irritation. Calculation. Control. He settled on control. He always did. Helen, you shouldn't be here. I shouldn't be a lot of things. Walter. Bankrupt. Forged. Lied to for 18 months. I looked at Brenda. She had the decency to look away. It was insufficient decency. But it was something. I'm not here to argue. I'm here to tell you something. He waited. The metal desk between us held a coffee mug, a stack of invoices, and 40 years of silence I was about to end, January 14th. I said, Emerson Hall, 7 o'clock. I'll be there. My lawyer will be there. A forensic accountant who spent 17 years with the IRS will be there. And every lobsterman, diva, and harbor pilot from Base Harbor to Winter Harbor will be there. I paused. You should come too. You'll want to hear what I have to say about Harborview Development Partners. Walter didn't blink. But his hand, the left one, resting on the desk beside his coffee, closed into a fist. Brenda's keys jingled. Neither of them spoke. I turned to leave. At the door I stopped. Oh, and Walter Gerald Foss. The $45,000. The dual authorization bypass. I let each phrase land separately. Like stones dropped into still water. I know. I walked out of the marina office into December air that tasted like salt and diesel and something new, something sharp and clean. Like the first breath after being underwater too long. Behind me, through salvaged lumber that carried sound faithfully. I heard Brenda Hamill say she knows. Walter. She knows everything. And Walter Callahan, for the first time in 40 years of marriage, had nothing to say. Walter Callahan had spent 40 years solving problems the same way he hauled lobster traps with force, speed, and the assumption that whatever was on the other end couldn't fight back. The first letter arrived December 29. Certified mail. Driscoll and Burke letterhead. Portland. Addressed to me. 8 pages. I read it at the kitchen table, while Ada watched my face, the way a nurse watches a heart monitor looking for the spike. The letter demanded 3 things. First, that I cease all contact with Walter Callahan and Brenda Hamill, citing harassment and intimidation during an unlawful visit to a private business premises on December 27. Second, that I immediately return all financial records, digital files, and proprietary business documents belonging to Callahan's Harbor Marina. LHE. Obtained without authorization. Third, that I withdraw any and all complaints or communications with Thomas McAllister. June Pelletier. And this was the part that made my hands stop any local, state, or federal law enforcement agencies. He knew we'd been building a case, and he wanted it dismantled before January 14th. I called McAllister. He answered on the second ring. I read him the letter. He was quiet for 11 seconds. I counted, and then he said, "File it. Don't respond." Driscoll and Burke are corporate litigators who handle boat insurance claims. They're not criminal defense attorneys. Walter hired the wrong firm, which means he's scared and spending fast. The second strike came December 30. Ada found it. She'd been monitoring the Bar Harbor Banking and Trust online portal. I'd added her as an authorized viewer on McAllister's advice, and at 8:14 a.m., she called me from her room at Seaside Pines. "Helen, your savings account. The $80,000. I opened the laptop. The balance read $0. Ling ling. Not 0 with a pending transaction. 0 with a completed one. A domestic relations hold filed by Driscoll and Burke through an emergency motion in Hancock County Probate Court had frozen every dollar I had. $80,000. My 40 years of careful saving. Library paychecks deposited bi-weekly. The money I'd never spent on myself, because Walter always said we needed to be responsible. Gone. Note stolen frozen. Which is theft's polite cousin. I sat at the table and felt something I hadn't felt since the pier the edge. Not the granite kind. The internal kind. The place where endurance meets its limit and the body starts to shut down instead of push forward. Ada arrived 20 minutes later. She didn't knock anymore. She walked in carrying 2 coffees from Cafe This Way and a look on her face that was less sympathy than strategy. "McAllister already knows," she said. "He's filing an emergency motion to unfreeze. Says the hold is procedurally defective. Walter's attorneys cited a statute that applies to contested estates, not active marriages. It'll be reversed in 72 hours. 72 hours. 3 days without access to a single dollar. I had half a tank of gas, a bag of potatoes, and enough birch to last 4 days. I'd survived worse. I'd survived Walter." The third strike came that afternoon. And it was the one that cut Constance Park, my former director at Jessup Memorial Library. The woman who'd asked, "Are you sure when I retired?" called at 2:17 p.m. Her voice was careful. The voice people use when they're delivering someone else's cruelty. "Helen, I have to tell you something. A man from Driscoll and Burke called the library this morning. He asked whether you'd ever had access to patron financial records or handled cash transactions during your employment. He implied there might be a discrepancy in the Friends of the Library fundraising accounts from 2021. There is no discrepancy. I said, I know that. I audited those accounts myself. Every penny is documented. A pause. Helen. I think they're trying to build a narrative. An unreliable woman. A woman with access problems. A woman who can't be trusted with money. There it was. The architecture of Walter's defense, not to prove his innocence, but to destroy my credibility. Forge my name for 6 years. Steal from my savings. Mortgage my house. And then tell the world I was the one who couldn't be trusted. I thanked Constance. She said something I didn't expect. Helen, I have every financial record from my 19 years as director. Fundraising accounts. Petty cash logs. Donor receipts. Everything. If you need them, they're yours. The fourth ally. Constance Park. 19 years of meticulous records. I hung up and looked at Ada, who was already writing on the legal pad. He's panicking. Ada said, men who build walls don't panic until someone finds the door. You found the door. Helen. He's just throwing furniture against it. I added Constance Park's name to the Canaan column on the kitchen wall. Below it, I wrote library records. 19 years. Complete. The wall was getting full. The table was getting organized. And Walter Callahan was getting desperate, which meant he was getting dangerous. Which meant January 14th couldn't come fast enough. McAllister called at 5. The emergency unfreeze motion was filed. He expected a ruling by January 2. He also had news. June pulled the marina's tax returns. Walter claimed you as a dependent for the last 3 years. You filed jointly. He forged those too. 3 years of forged tax returns. Add it to the list. The known column was running out of space. Tom. I said. How many crimes is that now? I stopped counting at 9. The DA won't. I hung up. Looked at the wall. Looked at Ada. Looked at the wood stove. Still burning. Still warm. Still maintained by me. 9 crimes. 1 husband. And 18 days until Emerson Hall. I added a new sheet to the wall. At the top, in block letters, I wrote January 14. Underneath, a single line. The room will be full. The truth will be louder. Chapter 10. The Allies. The first week of January arrived the way January always arrives in Bar Harbor Gray. Relentless. 22 degrees on a good day, and 12 on the others. The harbor froze along the edges. The roads narrowed under plowed banks that grew taller each morning. The town contracted. The way all coastal towns contract in winter. Pulling inward. Conserving warmth and gossip in equal measure. Hank Sorrento moved through that contracted world, like a current through cold water quiet. Steady. Impossible to stop. I didn't see most of it. I heard about it later. In pieces. The way you hear about weather that happened on another part of the island. But Ada tracked it. She had a notebook separate from the legal pads. Smaller. Green cover. The kind teachers use for attendance. And in it, she recorded every name Hank brought in. By January 4, the list had 17 names. By January 7, 31. Lobstermen from Bass Harbor and Bernard. Urchin divers from Southwest Harbor. 2 scallop draggers from Cranberry Isles, who took the mailboat in specifically to sign their names. A retired harbor pilot named Eugene Pottle, who'd guided tankers through Frenchman Bay for 30 years and said the lighthouse was the first honest thing a sailor sees coming home. A woman named Margaret Chew, who ran the fish market on Clark Point Road, and whose grandmother had been a keeper's daughter at Bass Harbor Head in 1923. 31 names. 31 people willing to stand up at a town council meeting in the dead of winter and say, no. Not to progress. Not to development. To fraud dressed in a business plan. Ada delivered the green notebook to McAllister on January 7. He called it the most effective piece of pre-trial community organizing I've seen in 30 years of practice. Ada said he was being dramatic. I think she was pleased. The account unfroze on January 2. As McAllister had predicted, the probate court judge, a woman named Sandra Michaud from Ellsworth, wrote a 4-sentence ruling that called the hold procedurally deficient and unsupported by the cited statute. My $80,000 reappeared on the screen, like a pulse returning to a flat line. I transferred $20,000 to a new individual account at Camden National, not Walter's branch. A different one. In Ellsworth, on Ada's advice. Diversify. Don't keep everything where they can reach it. On January 8, Ada drove me to Seaside Pines. I hadn't been inside since Walter had moved Ada there against her will. The facility sat on Route 3, between Bar Harbor and Ellsworth. A low building with beige siding and windows that all looked the same. Which is the architectural equivalent of telling someone their individuality no longer matters. The lobby smelled of industrial lavender and reheated soup. Ada walked through it without looking left or right. Chin up? The way a person walks through a place they've decided to outlast. She took me to the common room, where a woman was arranging medications into small paper cups with the efficiency of someone dealing cards. Patricia, Ada said. This is Helen. Patricia Ouellette was 63. A registered nurse who'd worked at Mount Desert Island Hospital for 28 years before taking the Seaside Pines position because, she said, someone has to make sure they don't kill these people with boredom. She had thick hands, short gray hair, and a voice that carried the St. John Valley accent, the same French Maine blend I'd heard in June Pelletier. Later, I'd learned they were second cousins. Aroostook County produces a specific kind of woman blunt. Varm. Unbreakable. You're the one whose husband mortgaged her house, Patricia said. Not a question. And forged my signature. And stole $45,000 from our savings. And committed tax fraud for 3 years. It's a long list. Patricia nodded. Unsurprised. I have something to add to it. She led us to her small office, a converted supply closet with a desk, a filing cabinet, and a window overlooking the parking lot. She closed the door. 3 weeks ago, December 15th. The day after the nor'easter, a man came to Seaside Pines. Signed the visitor log as Walter Callahan. He wasn't visiting a resident. He met with our administrator, Donald Graves, in the conference room for 45 minutes. December 15th. The day after he'd left me. The day after my birthday. While I was surveying storm damage in his old boots. Weiter was hier. What did they discuss? I asked. Patricia opened the filing cabinet and removed a single sheet of paper, a photocopy. Slightly skewed. Made in haste. After the meeting, Mr. Graves asked me to distribute this to all residents. She handed it to me. I didn't distribute it. I copied it instead. The document was a 1-page flyer. At the top, the Harborview Development Partners logo, a stylized wave inside a circle. Professional. Sueless. Below it, Bass Harbor Headlight Station, a new chapter Harborview Development Partners, is proud to propose a sensitive renovation of the historic Bass Harbor Headlight Station into a premier boutique hospitality experience. Residents of Seaside Pines Senior Living are invited to a private information session on January 10 to learn about this exciting project and its benefits to the local community. Refreshments provided, a private information session. For elderly residents of an assisted living facility, refreshments provided. Walter was recruiting supporters, people who would attend the January 14 council meeting and speak in favor of the project. People whose age and community standing would lend credibility. People who might not fully understand what they were endorsing. He was using the vulnerable to protect the profitable. The January 10th session. I said, "Did it happen? Scheduled for this Saturday." Patricia said, "2 days from now." Ada's pencil was already moving. "Patricia." I said, "Would you be willing to testify about this, the visitor log?" The flyer. The targeting of residents. Patricia Willette leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms over her chest, not defensive. Foundational. The posture of a woman who had held dying patients and difficult truths with equal steadiness. "Mrs. Callahan, I've watched 6 residents in this facility lose their homes to family members who decided they knew better. I've watched them sign documents they didn't understand because someone brought cookies and spoke slowly." She uncrossed her arms. "I'll testify, and I'll bring the visitor log. 5 allies now. Ada. McAllister. June. Hank. Patricia. 5 people who owed me nothing and gave me everything. On the drive home." Ada was quiet for 12 miles. Then, "Passing Soamesville," she said. "He went to the nursing home the day after he left you. The very next day. That means the lighthouse plan was already in motion. Leaving you wasn't the beginning. Helen. It was a step in a sequence. I watched Soames Sound pass outside the window, frozen at the edges. Open in the center. Still moving underneath. Then we need to know what step comes next." I said, "We already do." Ada replied, "January 10th. We attend that information session. We weren't invited." Ada Whitmore smiled the second time I'd seen it. And wider than the first. "Neither was he. At your house. At your bank. At your library." She turned the wheel toward Bar Harbor. "We're done waiting for invitations." Seaside Pines held its information sessions in a room the staff called the sunroom. Though the windows faced north, and the sun hadn't touched the carpet since the building was oriented wrong in 2003. Fluorescent lights. Folding chairs arranged in a semicircle. A card table with a white cloth. A plate of shortbread cookies from Hannaford. And a pitcher of lemonade that no one over 60 should be drinking in January. Ada and I arrived at 1:47 p.m. on January, 10:13 minutes before the scheduled start. Patricia had left the side entrance unlocked. She met us in the hallway wearing her uniform scrubs and an expression that said, "I didn't see you come in, and I won't see you sit down." 23 residents were already seated. Average age, I'd guess 81. Some in wheelchairs. Some with walkers parked beside their chairs like loyal dogs. Some sitting with the particular stillness of people who have been moved from room to room so many times that they no longer ask where they're going. They just go. Walter stood at the front beside a portable easel, holding a foam core presentation board. The Harborview logo, that soulless wave, printed large. Below it, architectural renderings I recognized immediately as stock images. Not actual plans. No scale bars. No site orientation. No structural details. It was a picture of a feeling, not a building. I'd spent 38 years shelving books on architecture. I knew the difference. Beside Walter stood Donald Graves. The administrator, 57. Thin. Wire-rimmed glasses. The posture of a man who managed downward and deferred upward. And beside Graves, already seated with a leather portfolio on her lap, was Brenda Hamill. Walter saw me the moment I sat down in the back row. His jaw moved the way a gear shifts mechanical. Involuntary. Brenda's hand went to her portfolio clasp. Graves looked from Walter to me and back. Sensing a weather change he wasn't equipped for, Walter recovered. He always recovered. That was his gift and his flaw, the same muscle. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Walter Callahan. Some of you know me from the marina, and I'm here to share an exciting opportunity for our community. He spoke for 11 minutes. I timed it. He talked about sensitive restoration, economic revitalization, heritage tourism, and honoring the past while building the future. He used the word community 14 times. He did not use the words demolition, mortgage, forgery, or shell company. He did not mention that the lighthouse was public property transferred under a Federal Preservation Act. He did not mention that his LLC had been funded with money stolen from his wife. He finished, smiled, asked if there were questions. A woman in the second row raised her hand. She was small, bird-boned, with white hair pinned in a style that hadn't changed since 1968. Mr. Callahan. My name is Dorothy Eames. I'm 91. My father was assistant keeper at Bass Harbor Head from 1932 to 1947. I grew up in that house. Her voice was thin, but level. The voice of someone who had outlived everything except her memory. You say you want to honor the past. Which past? Because I don't recall the past, including a hotel and a cocktail bar where my bedroom used to be. A murmur rippled through the semicircle. Not loud. The volume of 23 people who have been told to be quiet so many times that dissent comes out as a hum. Walter opened his mouth. I stood up. My name is Helen Callahan. Walter is my husband. Or he left me on my 68th birthday for Ms. Hamil, who is sitting right there. I pointed. Brenda's hand tightened on the portfolio. I'm not here to make a scene. I'm here because you deserve information that Walter isn't giving you. The room turned. 23 faces. 46 eyes. This project is funded by a $200,000 mortgage taken on my house forged with my signature. The company Walter represents, Harborview Development Partners, was registered using money withdrawn from our joint savings without my knowledge. His business partner is his girlfriend. His registered agent is his sister. A forensic accountant has documented over $600,000 in fraud connected to this venture. Silence. The kind that has mass. The kind you feel on your skin. Dorothy Eames turned in her chair and looked at Walter Callahan, with 91 years of accumulated judgment. Young man, she said, and at 72, Walter was young to her. My father kept that light burning through 2 hurricanes and a war. He didn't do it so you could turn it into a bed and breakfast with stolen money. Walter's composure cracked. Not visibly, not to the room. But I'd studied that face for 40 years. I saw the fracture line. The micro-expression that meant the calculation was failing. The force wasn't working. The trap he'd hauled was empty. This meeting is over, Donald Graves said quickly, rising from his chair. No, said a man in a wheelchair near the window. Theodore Sprague, 88. Korean War veteran. Retired teacher. His voice was quiet, but carried the way voices carry in rooms built for people who've been told they don't matter. The meeting is just starting. Sit down. Donald. Graves sat down. For the next 35 minutes, the residents of Seaside Pines asked questions that Walter could not answer. Where was the environmental impact study? Who approved the demolition of a federally transferred historic structure? Why was the appraisal on Mrs. Callahan's house performed by an unlicensed agent? Had the town council been informed of the LLC's funding source? Walter tried. He pivoted, deflected, smiled, used the word community 4 more times. But the room had shifted. The semicircle of folding chairs had become something else, a jury of people who'd had things taken from them by people who smiled while doing it. and who recognized the technique at 2:41 p.m. Walter Callahan picked up his foam core board, nodded to Graves, and walked out. Brenda followed, portfolio clutched to her chest. Neither of them touched the shortbread cookies. Dorothy Ames caught my hand as I passed her chair. Mrs. Callahan, January 14th, Emerson Hall, 7 o'clock. I'll need a ride. My son doesn't visit on Tuesdays. I'll drive you myself. She squeezed my hand. Her grip was stronger than I expected. 91 years. And the bones still held. Patricia appeared in the doorway and gave me a single nod. She had the visitor log in her hand. Photocopy. Time stamped. Walter's signature on December 15. And now, again today, January 10, signed in his own hand. Visiting a facility to recruit elderly supporters for a project built on fraud. 2 signatures. Both genuine. Both damning. On the way out. Ada counted heads. 23 residents attended. 19 want to come to the council meeting. Patricia will arrange the van. 19. Plus Hank's 31. Plus our team of 5. Plus Constance Park. 56 people. Walter Callahan had tried to build an army from a nursing home. Instead, he'd given me one. Chapter 11. The preparation. 3 days. That's what we had. January 11 to January 13. 72 hours to compress 7 weeks of evidence. Grief. Betrayal. And arithmetic into something a 7-member town council could understand in a single evening. McAllister ran the war room now. He arrived at 47 Ledgelawn Road on Saturday morning with a litigation bag, 2 boxes of documents, and a calm that bordered on geological. June Pelletier followed in her pickup, a 2004 Tacoma, with mud on the fenders and a bumper sticker that read, "Audit the Patriarchy," which I suspected was not a joke. "We have 1 shot," McAllister said. Standing at the kitchen table, the war table. Now permanently. Town council meetings allow public comment on agenda items. The Harborview Lighthouse proposal is Agenda Item 7. Each speaker gets 3 minutes. We get the same 3 minutes as everyone else. 3 minutes, Ada said. That's not enough. It's enough if we're precise. He opened his litigation bag. Inside, 7 identical folders. Each labeled Bass Harbor Head Public Comment Filing. Each containing a 22-page evidence summary. We don't need to win a trial on Tuesday. We need to create enough doubt that the council tables the vote. A tabled vote gives us time to file the criminal complaint and civil suit. Once those are on the record, the lighthouse sale is dead. He assigned roles. Helen, primary speaker. 3 minutes. Personal testimony, the forged mortgage. The stolen savings. The fraudulent valuation. No legal jargon. No anger. Just facts delivered by the woman Walter tried to erase. Ada, backup speaker. 3 minutes if needed. Real estate expertise. The $180K false appraisal. Comparable sales data. Brenda Hamill's lack of licensure. Main Title 32, Chapter 124. June technical speaker. 3 minutes. Financial forensics. The $610. 200 inches documented fraud. The 3 shell LLCs. The kickback commissions. The forged tax returns. She would reference but not distribute the full spreadsheet. The spreadsheet was for the DA and the court. The council got the summary. Captain Hank, community speaker. 3 minutes. 51 years on the water. The lighthouse as navigation aid. Cultural landmark. Community promise. He would also present the Green Notebook, 31 signatures, from working waterfront families opposing the sale. Patricia Institutional Speaker. 3 minutes. The Seaside Pines Recruitment Walters Visitor Log Entries. The Harborview Flyer. The targeting of elderly residents for political support. She would submit photocopies of both documents. Constance Park, character, speaker. 3 minutes. 19 years of library financial records, proving Helen's integrity. Directly rebutting Driscoll and Burke's implied embezzlement narrative. 6 speakers. 18 minutes. 7 evidence folders for 7 council members. McAllister rehearsed each of us. Not for polish, for discipline. He sat in Walter's chair, crossed his arms, and listened the way a council member would listen skeptically. Impatiently, with one eye on the clock. Helen, too long on the savings account. Cut the timeline. Hit the mortgage. The forgery, and the number 610,000. Then stop. Ada. The statute citation is good. Drop the second comparable. 1 is enough. Make eye contact with the council chair. June. Slow down on the LLC structure. Say shell company once. Say your neighbor changed stolen money twice. They're not accountants. They're selectmen. Hank. You're perfect. Don't change a word. Hank looked at me and shrugged. 51 years of hauling traps had made him efficient with language the same way it had made him efficient with rope. No slack. No waste. On January 12 Sunday, I drove to Bass Harbor, head alone. The parking lot was empty. The snow had been plowed once and not again, leaving a crust that cracked under my boots. I walked the path to the chain-link fence and stood where Ada and I had stood 24 days earlier. The lighthouse looked the same. Cracked foundation, curling shingles, boarded windows, the lantern room dark, no bulb since the automation. Just an LED array. The Coast Guard checked once a year. The keeper's house silent. The door still padlocked. Still pulling away from its frame. I didn't go closer. I just looked. 24 days ago, I'd asked Ada, how do we save it? In 48 hours. I'd answer that question in front of the entire town. I spoke to the lighthouse, the way you speak to a house you've maintained alone for 40 years quietly. Honestly, expecting nothing back. 2 more days. I said, hold on. The wind took the words. The granite held the light. And somewhere beneath the snow, the rugosa roses were still alive, waiting for a spring they couldn't see but trusted was coming. I drove home. The road was clear. The war table was ready. The folders were stacked. The team was assembled. 56 people had committed to showing up on a Tuesday night in January in a town of 5,000 to defend a building that had guided every one of them or their fathers or their grandmothers safely home. Walter Callahan had spent 40 years believing he was the most important person in Bar Harbor. On Tuesday, he'd learn he was wrong. Chapter 12. Emerson Hall. Emerson Hall was built in 1913 by the Village Improvement Association as a gift to the people of Bar Harbor. It has a peaked roof, clapboard siding, and a meeting room that seats 120. On January 14, at 6:43 p.m., 17 minutes before the town council meeting was scheduled to begin, there were already 109 people inside. And more coming up the steps. I know because Ada counted. She stood at the back door with her green notebook and counted heads the way she'd counted everything since I'd known her precisely. Without sentiment. Each number a fact she could use later. I arrived at 6:38 p.m. I wore the same Rennie's parka I'd given Ada on the pier. She'd returned it. Dry cleaned. With a note pinned inside the pocket. For the woman who walks toward the edge. Not away from it. I wore my library shoes, black flats. Low heel. the pair I'd worn for the last 12 years of my career. No jewelry, except my mother's wedding band, which I'd moved to my right hand the day Walter left. The left hand was bare. I wanted them to see it. McAllister was already inside, seated in the second row with June Pelletier and the 7 folders stacked on his lap. Hank Sorrento had claimed the center section, 3 rows of fishermen, their wives, 2 urchin divers, a scallop dragger from Cranberry Isles, who smelled of bait and didn't apologize for it. Margaret Chu sat at the end of Hank's row, hands folded, wearing a brooch shaped like a lighthouse that she told me her grandmother had been given by the keeper in 1929. Patricia Ouellette arrived at 6:51 p.m. in a Seaside Pines passenger van. 19 residents, 3 in wheelchairs. Dorothy Eames walked on her own. 91 years old. One hand on Patricia's arm and the other holding a leather handbag that looked older than most of the people in the room. She sat in the front row and didn't remove her coat. She was ready to leave when the job was done. Not a minute before, Constance Park sat near the window with a banker's box at her feet. 19 years of library financial records, organized by fiscal year, cross-referenced, and indexed. She'd added a cover letter. I hadn't asked her to. The council sat behind a long table on a raised platform at the front. 7 members, 4 men, 3 women, ages ranging from 42 to 70. Town manager Vivian Colwell presided 58. Gray hair cut practical, reading glasses on a chain. The kind of woman who had run meetings for 20 years and could sense a difficult night the way a captain senses weather. Walter was there. He sat in the 3rd row, left side, wearing a pressed shirt and his navy wool jacket, the same jacket he'd worn the morning he left. Brenda sat 2 seats away, not beside him. The distance calculated to suggest they were not together while fooling no one. Gerald Foss was behind them, khaki pants, fleece vest, the uniform of a man who wanted to appear casual and instead appeared nervous. Denise Callahan Rowe was absent. I noted that. So did McAllister. The room hummed, not with conversation, with presence. 119 people in a hall built for 120, standing room along the walls. The volunteer fire department had propped the rear doors open to satisfy the fire code, and cold January air slid across the floor like a tide coming in. Vivian Colwell called the meeting to order at 7:02 p.m. She worked through agenda items 1 through 6 in 41 minutes. Road maintenance, harbor fees, a zoning variance on Eagle Lake Road, budget amendments, committee appointments, and a dog leash ordinance that generated more debate than it deserved. The room sat through all of it. Nobody left. Nobody fidgeted. They were waiting. And they were patient. Because coastal people understand waiting. You wait for weather. You wait for tide. You wait for the trap to surface. Item 7. Vivian said. She removed her reading glasses and looked at the room. Proposed transfer of Bass Harbor Headlight Station property to Harborview Development Partners, LLC, for commercial development under Section 4. 7 of the Town Land Disposition Ordinance. She paused, looked at the packed hall, looked at the fishermen, the nurses, the 91-year-old woman in the front row, the 68-year-old woman in the second row whose left hand was bare. Public comment is open. 3 minutes per speaker. She put her glasses back on. I have a feeling we'll be here a while. McAllister touched my arm. 1 tap. That was the signal. I stood. 119 people turned. Walter Callahan turned. Brenda Hamill turned. Gerald Foss reached for the zipper of his fleece vest and pulled it halfway up, as though cold air could protect him from what was coming. I walked to the podium. It was oak. Scarred, older than the building. A single microphone, the kind that clips to the stand with a worn spring. I adjusted it. The room heard the adjustment, a small metallic sound. Amplified. The sound of someone preparing to be heard. I looked at Vivian Colwell. At the 7 council members. At Dorothy Eames in the front row. Her leather handbag in her lap. Her father's lighthouse in her eyes. I had 3 minutes. 180 seconds. Less time than it takes to make chowder. And more time than it took Walter to dismiss me at the marina. I opened my mouth. And 40 years of silence ended. My name is Helen Callahan. I've lived in Bar Harbor for 40 years. I've paid taxes for 40 years. I've maintained a house, a marriage, and a career in this town for 4 decades without asking anyone for anything. I paused. 31 days ago, my husband left me, and I discovered he'd been stealing from me for years. Tonight, I'm going to tell you exactly what he took, and exactly what he plans to take from all of you. I had rehearsed with McAllister 4 times. Each time he'd cut something. By the 4th rehearsal, what remained was bone, no fat. No sentiment. No adjectives Walter could argue with. Just facts. Delivered in the order they happened. The way I'd once organized library shelves chronologically. Precisely. So anyone looking could find what they needed. On September 3rd, my husband withdrew $45,000 from our joint savings account without my knowledge or consent. On September 14th, he signed a $200,000 mortgage on our home at 47 Ledgelawn Road, forging my signature on the application. The funds were deposited into Callahan's Harbor Marina, LC, and $145,000 was transferred to a joint account held by Mr. Callahan and Brenda Hamill. I didn't look at Walter. I looked at Vivian Colwell. Her pen had stopped moving. The property appraisal attached to our divorce petition values our home at $180,000. A licensed appraiser, not Miss Hamill, who is a sales agent without appraisal credentials under Maine Title 32. Chapter 124 has determined the property's fair market value exceeds $340,000. The appraisal was performed by Brenda Hamill, my husband's business partner and romantic partner. The difference, $160,000, is money my husband intended to keep by lying about the value of my home. A murmure. Vivian did not quiet it. Some sounds a room needs to make. Harborview Development Partners, LLC, the company proposing to acquire Bass Harbor Headlight Station, was registered on August 22nd using funds stolen from our joint savings. Its members are Walter Callahan and Brenda Hamill. Its registered agent is Denise Callahan Rowe, my husband's sister, who is not present tonight. I paused. Let the absence fill the room. A forensic accountant has documented $610,200 in fraud connected to this operation. I have not come here to ask for sympathy. I have come to ask this council not to transfer a public historic landmark to a company built on stolen money. 173 seconds. 7 seconds to spare. I sat down. McAllister's hand found my shoulder. One squeeze. Enough. Ada was next. She walked to the podium the way she walked everywhere upright. Efficient. House slippers replaced by the low-heeled boots I'd bought her at Rennie's the week before. She spoke for 2 minutes and 40 seconds. She presented the comparable sales 14 Ocean Drive. 395美元. 000 and the true valuation. She cited the statute. She looked the council chair in the eye when she said, the appraisal on Mrs. Callahan's home would not survive 10 minutes in any courtroom in this state. June followed. She was slower at the podium than at the kitchen table, deliberate. Calibrated. Her IRS years showing in every measured phrase. She said shell company once. She said your neighbor's stolen money twice. Exactly as McAllister had coached, she described the 3 LLCs. The kickback commissions totaling $55,200. And the 3 years of forged joint tax returns. She did not distribute the spreadsheet. She held it up a single page. 14 columns, 47 rows, and said, "This document will be submitted to the Hancock County District Attorney tomorrow morning. You are welcome to examine it after this meeting. Council Member Number 4, Raymond Dyer." 67. Retired electrician leaned forward and removed his glasses. Council Member Number 2, Elaine Guptill. 51. Owner of a bed and breakfast on West Street, wrote something on her notepad and underlined it twice. Captain Hank Sorrento walked to the microphone with the green notebook open in his hands. "I'm not a lawyer," he said. "I'm not an accountant. I catch lobster." A pause that landed perfectly natural. Unhurried. The timing of a man who'd never rushed anything in his life. "I've fished past Bass Harbor Head for 51 years. That light has brought me home in fog so thick I couldn't see my own bow. It brought my father home. It brought Eugene Pottle home for 30 years of piloting tankers into Frenchman Bay." Eugene Pottle, seated in Hank's section, nodded once. The nod of a man confirming coordinates. "This notebook contains 31 signatures from families who work this waterfront. Lobstermen. Diverse. Draggers. Their wives. Their sons." Hank closed the notebook. "These are people who don't come to meetings. They come tonight because someone is trying to buy something that isn't for sale. Bass Harbor Head Light belongs to this town. Not to a company. Not to a man who forged his wife's name to pay for it." He placed the green notebook on the council table in front of Vivian Colwell and walked back to his seat. Patricia spoke next. She was clinical. Precise. Devastating. The visitor log photocopied. Time-stamped. Walter Callahan. December 15. Walter Callahan. January 10. The Harborview flyer targeting Seaside Pines residents. The canceled information session. 19 residents present tonight who had come not to support the project, as Walter intended, but to oppose it. "These are people in my care," Patricia said. "They were targeted because someone assumed they would be easy to persuade. They are not easy. They are experienced. And they are here." Dorothy Eames, front row, lifted her chin. Theodore Sprague, in his wheelchair, raised one hand, not a wave. "A salute. Korean War." I remembered. Some gestures don't expire. Last Constance Park. She placed the banker's box on the floor beside the podium and spoke without notes. "I was Helen Callahan's director at Jessup Memorial Library for 19 years. 2 weeks ago, an attorney from Portland called my office and implied that Helen had mishandled fundraising accounts. I'm here to tell you that every dollar Helen Callahan ever touched at that library is documented, audited, and accounted for. I brought the records." She tapped the box with her foot. 19 years. Not a penny missing. Not one. She looked at the room. Then at Walter. "The person in this room with a financial integrity problem is not Helen Callahan." The room didn't applaud. Bar Harbor doesn't applaud at town meetings. But the silence that followed Constance Park's testimony had a texture, the texture of 119 people arriving at the same conclusion simultaneously. Vivian Colwell looked at the council. The council looked at each other. Raymond Dyer's glasses were still off. Elaine Guptill's notepad had a full page. "Is there anyone else wishing to speak on item 7? Vivian asked. Walter Callahan stood. Walter Callahan walked to the podium the way he walked onto his boat, shoulders squared. Chin level. The gait of a man who believed the ocean owed him safe passage. He adjusted the microphone upward. He was taller than me. He'd always been taller than me. For 40 years. That had felt like protection. Tonight it looked like a man trying to stand above a tide that had already reached his chest. My name is Walter Callahan. I've operated Callahan's Harbor Marina for 24 years. I employ 6 people year-round and 14 seasonally. I pay taxes. I maintain waterfront infrastructure that this town depends on. He paused. Scanned the room. Looking for allies. Finding Gerald Foss, who nodded once, a small, tight nod. The nod of a man already calculating his exit. The Harborview proposal is a legitimate economic development project. It would create 32 permanent jobs, generate an estimated $400,000 in annual tax revenue, and restore a property that this town has neglected for 6 years. The claims made tonight are personal grievances from a difficult divorce. They do not belong in a public forum. Personal grievances. A difficult divorce. $45,000 stolen from joint savings. $200,000 forged on a mortgage. $160,000 hidden in a fraudulent appraisal. $610,000. $200 reduced to personal grievances. He continued for another 90 seconds. Tourism growth. Heritage. Hospitality. National trends in lighthouse conversion. He used numbers the way he used bait, scattered generously, hoping something would bite. But the room had already been fed. The room had eaten 22 pages of evidence, 31 signatures, a visitor log with 2 timestamps, and 19 years of library receipts. Walter's numbers landed on a full table. He finished, returned to his seat. Brenda's hand moved toward his arm. He pulled away. The gesture was small, but the front 3 rows saw it. Dorothy Eames saw it. She tilted her head the way a bird tilts when assessing whether something on the ground is food or threat. Vivian Colwell thanked all speakers. She looked at the 7 council members. The matter before us is the proposed transfer of Bass Harbor Headlight Station property to Harborview Development Partners, LLC. Under Section 4(7) of the Town Land Disposition Ordinance. Given the volume and nature of public testimony received tonight, I'd like to open the floor for council discussion before proceeding to a vote. Raymond Dyer spoke first. He put his glasses back on, which meant he was about to read something he'd written. I've reviewed the evidence folder distributed this evening. Page 14 contains a property transfer timeline that shows Harborview Development Partners was incorporated 5 weeks before the mortgage on Mrs. Callahan's home was executed. The funding source for this LLC appears to be directly connected to alleged fraud against a Bar Harbor resident. He looked at Walter. I'm not a judge, but I am a voter, and I won't vote to transfer public property to a company under these circumstances. Elaine Guptill didn't read from notes. She spoke from whatever she'd underlined twice. Mr. Callahan called these personal grievances. A forged signature isn't personal. It's criminal. And the town has a fiduciary obligation not to enter into agreements with entities facing credible allegations of fraud. I move to table this item indefinitely, pending the outcome of any legal proceedings. Seconded, said Council Member Number 5, Harold Trask. 70. Retired school principal. A man of so few words that his seconding carried the weight of a closing argument. Vivian called the vote. The room held its breath. 119 people. And for a moment, the only sound was the baseboard heating and the wind against Emerson Hall's 1,913 windows. All in favor of tabling agenda item 7 indefinitely. 7 hands. All 7. Unanimous. Motion carries. Item 7 is tabled indefinitely. The room exhaled. Not applause. Bar Harbor still doesn't applaud at town meetings, but something released. A collective unclenching. Hank's fishermen shifted in their seats. Patricia put her hand on Dorothy's shoulder. Ada closed the green notebook. Constance Park pushed the banker's box under her chair with her foot. The way you put away a tool when the job is done. Gerald Foss stood. He didn't look at Walter. He didn't look at anyone. He walked up the center aisle. Past the fishermen. Past the Seaside Pines residence. Past Dorothy Eames. And out the rear doors that the fire department had propped open. The cold air swallowed him. Nobody called him back. Walter remained seated. Brenda whispered something. He didn't respond. He was looking at me. I was looking at him. The room moved around us, people standing. Coats rustling. Conversations beginning in the low murmur of a town, processing what it had just witnessed. But between Walter and me, there was a corridor of silence, 40 years long. And neither of us crossed it. His face held something I hadn't expected. Not anger. Not shame. Something older. Something that lived beneath the calculations, and the forgeries, and the navy wool jacket. A look I recognized from the night of our first dance in 1984. When he'd stood across the floor at the town hall and hadn't yet decided who he wanted to be. He'd decided now. Sue had I stood. Picked up my coat. The Rennie's parka with Ada's note in the pocket. I didn't put it on. I carried it over my arm. The way you carry something you no longer need for warmth because the cold has lost its power over you. McAllister appeared beside me. Criminal complaint filed tomorrow. Civil suit by end of week. We'll need you at the courthouse Monday. I'll be there. Ada was waiting at the door. June was already outside. Her Tacoma running. Headlights, cutting through the snow. Hank stood on the steps with Eugene Pottle and Margaret Chu. Their breath rising in the January air like signals. I paused at the threshold. Turned back one last time. Walter was still sitting. The hall was emptying around him. Brenda was gone, slipped out a side door. I imagined the way she'd slipped into my marriage. The 7 evidence folders sat on the council table. Untouched by Walter. Read by everyone else. He looked old. Not 72 old. The other kind. The kind of old that happens in an evening. When the thing you built turns out to have no foundation, and the whole structure comes down at once. I didn't feel sorry for him. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt something. I didn't have a word for something, between grief and geography. Like standing on a shoreline watching a boat you once loved, drift past the breakwater, and knowing it won't come back. And knowing you won't follow. Helen. Ada's voice. From the doorway. Quiet. Patient. I stepped outside. The snow had stopped. The sky had cleared for the first time in weeks. And above Bar Harbor, the stars were out sharp. Cold. Indifferent. Ancien. The kind of stars that don't care about town councils or forged mortgages or 40-year marriages. They just burn. Steadily. Without apology. The way I intended to. From now on. Chapter 13. The Reckoning. Thomas McAllister filed the criminal complaint at the Hancock County District Attorney's Office at 8:41 a.m. on January 15, 14 hours after the unanimous vote. 9 hours after I'd stood in my driveway looking at stars. And 32 days after Walter had walked out the door with 2 suitcases and a lie about $80,000 being fair. I was with him. June Pelletier was with him. Ada waited in the truck because she said courthouses made her claustrophobic. But I think she wanted to guard the backup drives. She'd made 3 copies of everything, one in McAllister's office safe, one in her room at Seaside Pines, behind a stack of Robert's engineering textbooks, and one in a waterproof bag inside Captain Hank Sorrento's bait cooler on the Abigail Rose, which June called the most secure evidence locker in Hancock County. The DA was a woman named Claire Arsenault, 47. Humane law. 12 years in the office. The last 4 as elected DA. She had a reputation for 2 things: preparing cases that didn't collapse, and eating lunch at her desk every day because she didn't believe in wasting an hour on something that could be done in 11 minutes. McAllister had called her at 6 a.m. She'd answered on the first ring, which told me she'd been expecting the call, which told me that sound really does carry on water in Bar Harbor. We sat in her office, a small room in the county building on State Street, Ellsworth, with a window overlooking the Union River and a framed photograph of Ruth Bader Ginsburg that had been there so long the frame had faded, but the face hadn't. June presented the spreadsheet. 14 columns, 47 rows. She walked Arsenault through each category, the way she'd walked through 412 IRS cases methodically, without inflection, letting the numbers carry their own weight. Arsenault listened for 38 minutes without interrupting. Then she asked 3 questions. The forged signatures. How many? 5. Documented. June said. 1 on the mortgage application. 3 on the commercial loan applications. 1 on the most recent joint tax return. We believe there are more. The bank. Foss. Gerald Foss. Branch manager. Bar Harbor Banking and Trust. He authorized a $45,000 withdrawal from a joint account without dual signature verification. Standard procedure requires both account holders for withdrawals over $10,000. The sister. Denise Callahan Rowe. Registered agent for all 3 Shell LLCs. Augusta address. She was absent from the council meeting last night. Arsenault wrote something on a yellow legal pad. 3 words. I couldn't read them from where I sat, but McAllister could, and I saw his jaw tighten, not with worry, with confirmation. I'm opening a formal investigation. Arsenault said, grand jury referral within 30 days. In the meantime, I'm issuing subpoenas for Walter Callahan's financial records. Callahan's Harbor Marina LLC records all 3 Shell Company filings and Bar Harbor Banking and Trust's transaction logs for the past 24 months. She looked at me. Mrs. Callahan, you'll be called as a witness. Possibly multiple times. I understand. This will be public. It already is. Arsenault almost smiled. Almost. The civil suit was filed at Hancock County Superior Court at 1115 a.m. McAllister had drafted it over the weekend, 41 pages. Cleaner than Walter's divorce petition. Sharper than Driscoll and Burke's cease and desist. The defendants Walter R. Callahan, Brenda L. Hamill, Denise Callahan Rowe, Harborview Development Partners, LLC, Acadia Coastal Holdings, LLC, and Mount Desert Capital Group, LLC. The claims fraud, forgery, conversion, unjust enrichment, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and civil conspiracy. The damages sought $760,000, $200 plus attorney's fees, punitive damages, and a permanent injunction against the sale or transfer of Bass Harbor Headlight Station. The clerk stamped the filing. Case number CV 2025010047. By 2 o'clock that afternoon, the subpoenas were served. Walter received his at the marina. The process server told McAllister that Walter read the first page, set it on the metal desk, and said nothing. Brenda received hers at Hamill and Associates on Cottage Street. Above the ice cream shop, she called a lawyer in Bangor within the hour, a different firm than Driscoll and Burke. Her own counsel. Separate from Walter's, the first crack in their alliance became a fracture, became a wall between 2 people who had shared a Camden National Bank account and were now building separate defenses Denise Callahan Rowe was served at her apartment in Augusta at 4:17 p.m. By 4:52 p.m., McAllister received a call from her attorney, a public defender, which meant Denise didn't have money for private counsel, which meant Walter hadn't shared the proceeds as evenly as his sister might have believed. Gerald Foss was not served. He walked into the Hancock County Sheriff's Office at 3:30 p.m., 90 minutes before the process server reached his house and asked to speak with an investigator. He brought his laptop, a box of printed transaction records, and a written statement. Gerald Foss was cooperating. McAllister called me at 5. I was at the kitchen table, the war table. Though it was starting to feel like something else now. Something less defensive and more architectural. The table where things were being built. Not just protected. Gerald Foss gave a full statement. McAllister said, Walter asked him to bypass the dual authorization in August. Told him the withdrawal was for a boat engine and that you'd approved it verbally. Foss believed him. He processed it without your signature. Did Foss know about the mortgage? He says no. But he acknowledged processing 2 additional wire transfers from the Marina account to Camden National, both to the Callahan-Hamill joint account in October and November, totaling $62,000. New money. $62,000 I hadn't known about. The spreadsheet was already out of date. June's updating the numbers. McAllister said, We're north of $800,000 now. $800,000. Taken from a woman who made $38,000 a year and thought $49 for a parka was extravagant. And Brenda retained Alan Pratt. Criminal defense. Bangor. He's already called my office. He wanted to know if the DA would consider a cooperation agreement. Brenda Hamil, who had appraised my house at half its value, who had collected $55,000 in kickback commissions, who had sat in my husband's marina office while he planned the theft of a lighthouse. Brenda Hamill wanted to cooperate. What did you tell him? I asked. I told him that's between Ms. Hamill and the district attorney, and that Mrs. Callahan has no interest in negotiating with people who forged her name. I looked at the kitchen wall. The known column was full. The suspected column was shrinking. The UNKNON column had only 2 entries left, the total number of properties, and whether Walter would fight or fold. I moved 1 entry from known to known. Brenda is cooperating. The wall was almost finished. The case was almost built. And somewhere in a marina office on Harbor Drive, Walter Callahan sat alone at a metal desk with a subpoena and a silence that no amount of force could break. He had 6 seasonal employees, a boat that needed an engine, $150,000 in commercial debt, and a girlfriend who had just hired her own lawyer. The tide had turned, and Walter Callahan had never learned to swim. The grand jury convened on February 12, 28 days after the council vote. 59 days after Walter packed his suitcases. I wasn't in the room. Grand jury proceedings in Maine are closed. But McAllister briefed me every evening at the kitchen table. And June updated her spreadsheet with each new disclosure. And Ada kept the green notebook current with names, dates, and a running timeline that now stretched across 3 pages of her small, square handwriting. Brenda Hamill testified on February 14, Valentine's Day. I don't think the irony was intentional. But the universe has a scheduling sense that lawyers don't. Alan Pratt, her Bangor attorney, had negotiated a cooperation agreement with D.A. Arsenault, full testimony in exchange for reduced charges. Brenda would plead guilty to 1 count of fraud and 1 count of conspiracy. Both Class C felonies under Maine law. Maximum exposure, 5 years. With cooperation, Arsenault estimated 18 months. Suspended to probation. Brenda took the deal in 11 minutes, which was, according to June, faster than Claire Arsenault ate lunch. What Brenda gave them filled 43 pages of transcribed testimony. She confirmed the forged mortgage, said Walter had told her Helen knew about it and didn't care. She confirmed the kickback commissions, $55, $200 across 3 properties, and admitted they'd been structured as consulting fees to avoid reporting thresholds. She provided email correspondence between Walter and Denise Callahan Rowe regarding the shell company registrations. She identified a 4th LLC I hadn't known about Downeast Heritage Group. LLC registered in November. Intended to acquire 2 additional properties in Tremont before the Lighthouse deal closed. She also confirmed something I'd suspected, but hadn't been able to prove the retirement. Walter had pressured me to leave the library not because he wanted us to enjoy our years together, but because my income made me financially independent enough to notice discrepancies. He needed me home. Offline. Isolated away from the institution that had given me a salary, colleagues, and a daily reason to be competent. My retirement wasn't a kindness. It was an amputation. McAllister told me this on a Tuesday evening. I was holding a mug of Earl Grey. I set it down carefully, because my hands were shaking and the mug was the unchipped one, and I didn't want to break the only good thing left in the cabinet. "Helen," he said. "Are you all right?" "No," I said. "But I'm accurate. There's a difference." Denise Callahan Rowe entered a guilty plea on February 19. 1 count of conspiracy to commit fraud. Her public defender had argued for leniency based on limited involvement. Denise had registered the LLCs, but claimed she didn't understand their purpose. Arsenault accepted the plea. Denise received 2 years of probation, a $5,000 fine, and the permanent loss of her notary license. She did not contact Walter after the plea. She did not contact me. She disappeared into Augusta, the way people disappear into cities, not dramatically. Just completely. The way a wave pulls back from sand and leaves no mark. Gerald Foss was granted immunity in exchange for his full cooperation. His transaction records unlocked an additional $38. 0 inches transfers that June hadn't found money. Moved through a personal account Walter kept at a credit union in Ellsworth, separate from all known business accounts. The revised total climbed past $840. Ling ling ling. The grand jury returned a 12-count indictment against Walter Callahan on February 26. The charges: 2 counts of forgery, Class B, 3 counts of fraud, Class C, 2 counts of identity theft, Class C, 1 count of money laundering, Class B, 1 count of tax fraud, Class C, 1 count of bribery of a public official. This was new. Gerald Foss's testimony revealed that Walter had paid the Bar Harbor harbormaster, a town employee named Dale Keniston, $0.000 to expedite marina, permits over 3 years, 1 count of civil conspiracy, and 1 count of theft by unauthorized taking, 12 counts. Maximum combined exposure, 47 years. Walter Callahan was arrested at Callahan's Harbor Marina at 7:14 a.m. on February 27. I know because Hank Sorrento was on the water that morning and saw the sheriff's cruiser pull into the gravel lot from a quarter-mile out. He called me at 7:16. "They've got him." Helen. I was standing at the kitchen window. The harbor was visible through bare branches, winter trees. Stripped clean. Hiding nothing. The same view I'd had for 40 years. But the woman looking through it was not the same woman who'd stood there on December 14. Listening to a door close. "Thank you. Hank. You going to be okay? I'm going to be accurate." He laughed, the short, nasal Maine laugh. "That's the same thing. Up here." Walter called me from the Hancock County Jail at 4:30 p.m. that afternoon. I hadn't expected it. The phone rang, and the automated system said, You have a collect call from an inmate at the Hancock County Detention Facility. And I pressed 1 to accept because 40 years of answering when Walter called is a reflex that takes longer than 32 days to unlearn. Helen. His voice was different. Smeller. The conference room baritone was gone. What was left was the voice of a 32-year-old man at a town dance, asking a librarian if she wanted to waltz. Before he'd learned that other people's signatures could be used as currency. Helen. I know what you need. Walter. Silence. The kind that hums on a jailhouse phone line electric. Metered. Charged by the minute, in more ways than one. You need someone to fix what you've broken. You need someone to call the lawyer and manage the paperwork and make sure the bills are paid while you're gone. You need someone to maintain the house you mortgaged and balance the books you falsified and clean the flue on the stove you never touched. I paused. You need a wife. The one you had. The one you threw away? Helen, I am not that woman anymore. Walter, she kept your marina running for 30 years. And you repaid her with forgery. She gave up a manuscript and a career and a name, and you used that name to steal $800,000. My voice didn't shake. The mug in my hand didn't tremble. The kitchen table held steady beneath my palm pine. 6 feet long. Scared. Refinished twice. Still standing. You will not call this number again. Your attorney can contact my attorney. And Walter. Yes. The house is worth $340,000. Not $180. You knew that. Brenda knew that. And now 12 jurors know it too. I hung up, set the phone on the table, looked at the wall canon. Suspected. Unknown. I moved the last entry from known to known. Walter will not fold. Walter has already fallen. The wall was finished. Every column filled. Every number documented. Every name accounted for. I took the sheets down. Folded them. Placed them in the fireproof lockbox beside June's spreadsheet and Ada's notebook and Constance's cover letter and Patricia's photocopied visitor log and Hank's green notebook, now retired. Its 31 signatures preserved like a guest book from a party, where the whole town showed up. Then I made a cup of tea. Sat in the chair that was now mine, not Walter's. Not the default chair, but the one I'd chosen because it faced the window and the harbor and the light. I don't remember which book. It didn't matter. What mattered was the silence, and for the first time since December 14. It was mine. Chapter 14. The Light. Walter Callahan was sentenced on April 3 inches Hancock County Superior Court. Judge Martin Bork presided. The courtroom was small, built for a county that settles most disputes over coffee, and every seat was taken. I sat in the second row. Ada beside me. Hank behind us. June had been called as an expert witness during the trial and sat in the gallery now with the particular stillness of someone whose spreadsheet had already done its work. The trial itself had lasted 9 days. Walter's attorney, he'd replaced Driscoll and Burke with a criminal defense firm from Portland. Healy and Saucier argued, diminished judgment, financial desperation, a marina failing in a changing economy. He did not argue innocence. There was no innocence left to argue. The jury deliberated for 4 hours and 11 minutes. Guilty on all 12 counts. Judge Bork sentenced Walter to 7 years in the Maine Department of Corrections. With eligibility for parole. After 4, restitution $843. 000, the final number June had calculated. Down to the last forged check and bribed permit. The marina was seized under a civil forfeiture order. The house at 47 Ledgelawn Road was confirmed as Helen's sole property, free of all liens. The forged mortgage, voided by court order, Walter stood when the sentence was read. He didn't look at me. He looked at the window, the one facing the Union River, and I thought of all the windows he'd never looked through in our house. All the views he'd never seen, because he was always facing the water. Always facing away. They took him through a side door. The navy wool jacket was gone, replaced by county orange. The door closed. 40 years ended with a click. The lighthouse took longer to save than the marriage took to dismantle. The Bar Harbor Town Council voted unanimously on March 8 to reject all pending development inquiries for Bass Harbor Headlight Station. In April, McAllister helped me file a proposal with the town under the National Historic Lighthouse Preservation Act, a community stewardship plan. Nonprofit status. With Helen Callahan as founding director and Ada Whitmore as board treasurer, the nonprofit was called the Keeper's Light Foundation. Ada named it. She said a keeper isn't the person who owns the light. A keeper is the person who makes sure it doesn't go out. The restoration began in May. Hank organized volunteer crews, the same fishermen who'd signed the Green Notebook, plus their sons, plus a group of students from College of the Atlantic who needed community service hours and got considerably more than they'd expected. We replaced the cedar shingles first, then the boarded windows, real glass. Double-paned, fitted by Raymond Dyer, who turned out to be a better glazier than council member. The granite foundation cracks were repaired with lime mortar mixed by June Pelletier's husband, a retired mason named Roland, who spoke even less than Hank and worked twice as fast. The keeper's house became a community reading room. I stocked it with books from the library's deaccession list and donations from Constance Park's personal collection. We added a wood stove, a Jotule 500, smaller than mine, but the same Norwegian iron, the same reliable heat. Patricia brought a group from Seaside Pines every Thursday. Dorothy Eames sat in the same room where she'd slept as a child and read mystery novels in a chair by the window that looked out over the same Atlantic. Her father had watched every night. The lantern room was restored in September. The town installed a new LED array, brighter, more efficient, visible for 19 nautical miles. The Coast Guard certified it on September 22. That night, Hank Sorrento took the Abigail Rose out past the breakwater and radioed me from the water. I can see it. Helen. Clear as anything. I was standing in the lantern room. The light swept past me 4 seconds on, 4 seconds off and below. The keeper's house glowed with warm light. And inside it, 15 people were reading books and drinking coffee and existing in a space that had been saved because a town decided it mattered. How does it look? I asked. Like a promise someone kept. I hung up the radio and stood there for a while. The glass was cold. The light was warm. The interval was steady 4 on, 4 off, and I counted it the way I'd counted it 5 years ago, when I'd stood at the railing with Walter, and he'd stayed in the truck, and I'd stayed with the light. I was still staying. I found it in October, not by searching. I'd stopped searching for things Walter had buried years ago. I found it the way you find most important things, by looking for something else entirely. I was clearing the attic. The restoration had given me an appetite for repair, and 47 Ledgelawn Road had 40 years of deferred maintenance that no court order could address. The attic was the last room pitched ceiling. One bare bulb. The smell of cedar and mouse droppings and thyme. Walter had used it for storage fishing gear. Marina tax files. Boxes of magazines he'd never read but refused to throw away because ownership, to Walter, was the same as value. Behind 3 boxes of Saltwater Sportsman, 1996 to 2008. Complete, I found a plastic bin with a blue lid. No label. I opened it expecting tackle or old receipts, inside 214 pages. Typed on my mother's Olivetti lettera, 32. The one I'd kept at the library, until Constance made me take it home in 2012, because typewriters aren't part of the collection. Helen. They're part of you. The pages were yellow at the edges, softened by 30 years of attic humidity. But the type was clean. Carbon ribbon. Each letter struck with the deliberate pressure of a 28-year-old woman who believed she had something to say, the keeper's daughter. A nouvelle. Mes nouvelles. The one I'd started in 1986 and abandoned in 1991 when the query letters stopped and the Marina books started, and Walter said writing was a nice hobby but not a priority. I carried the bin downstairs. Set it on the kitchen table, the war table. The peace table. The table that had held everything this year and hadn't cracked. I read the first page standing up. My mother said the light was not ours to keep. It belonged to the ships. And the ships belonged to the sea. And the sea belonged to no one. But I kept it anyway. Every night. Because she also said the things that belong to no one need someone the most. I sat down. Read 20 more pages. The prose was young, earnest. Overwritten in places. Underwritten in others. The way first novels always are. But the bones were there. The architecture of a story about a girl growing up in a lighthouse, watching her father tend a light that guided strangers home, wondering if anyone would ever come for her. I closed the bin, made tea, sat in the chair that was now mine, not Walter's. Not the default chair, but the one I'd chosen because it faced the window and the harbor and the light. The next morning, I bought a laptop from the Best Buy in Bangor. Ada Drove. She didn't ask what it was for. She already knew. I opened a blank document and typed Chapter 1. The manuscript had waited 30 years. I wouldn't make it wait any longer. She came on a Thursday in November. Patricia's Seaside Pines group had just left. And I was reshelving a habit that 38 years at Jesup Memorial had wired into my hands, the way knot tying is wired into a fisherman's. The keeper's house reading room smelled of wood stove and salt air, and the particular warmth of a space where people have been sitting quietly together. Which is different from the warmth of an empty room. The door opened. A woman 26. Maybe 27 stood on the threshold in a canvas jacket, too thin for November on the coast. Dark hair pulled back. No gloves. She held a manila envelope the way I'd held Walter's divorce petition 11 months ago with both hands. At arm's length, as though the paper itself might detonate. Are you Helen Callahan? I am. The woman from the town meeting. The one whose husband, yes. She stepped inside. Looked around the reading room, the books. The stove. The chair where Dorothy Eames sat every Thursday. The window facing the Atlantic. She was looking for something. Not a book. A sign that this was a safe place to say what she'd come to say. My name is Audrey Keene. I'm from Ellsworth. I work at the hospital reception. Front desk. She swallowed. My mother opened 6 credit cards in my name. 3 store cards. 2 Visa. 1 MasterCard. Total balance, $41,000. I found out in September when I applied for an apartment, and the landlord ran my credit. She set the manila envelope on the table. Inside credit reports, collection notices. A handwritten letter from her mother that began, I was going to pay it back and ended. You owe me for raising you alone. I'd seen that arithmetic before. The math of people who believe love is a ledger and children are collateral. Audrey, I said. Sit down. She sat. I made tea, Earl Grey. Loose leaf. The tin I now kept on the counter, instead of behind the flour canister, because there was no one left to call it pretentious. I gave her the unchipped mug. Have you filed a police report? No. She's my mother. I understand. And I did. More than she knew. But the people who love you do not get to use you as currency. That is not love. That is forgery of trust. Of identity. of the person you're supposed to become. She looked at the mug, at the steam, at me. What do? I pulled a card from the drawer beside the wood stove, one of 30 I'd had printed in September. After the fourth person called the foundation, asking not about the lighthouse but about fraud. The Keepers Light Foundation Financial Fraud Resource Line, Helen Callahan. Director 207, 280, she opt noa mio suta patruzech. You call this number Monday morning. A woman named June Pelletier will answer. She spent 17 years at the IRS. And she will help you understand every dollar, every account, and every option. Then you call Tom McAllister. His number is on the back. He's a lawyer. He's good. He won't let your mother's letter make you feel guilty for protecting yourself. Audrey turned the card over. Read both sides. Held it the way you hold a key when you've been standing outside a locked door for a very long time. How much does it cost? The first consultation is free. June insists. She says it's her retirement hobby. Tom charges on a sliding scale. I paused. And if you need help beyond that? The foundation has a small fund. Ada Whitmore set it up. She was the first person I helped. And she decided no one else should have to stand on a pier in January to find out they weren't alone. Audrey Keene left the Keeper's house at 4:17 p.m., with the card in her jacket pocket and the manila envelope under her arm. She didn't cry. She didn't thank me. She walked down the granite path toward the parking lot with the posture of a woman who had entered a building carrying a weight and was leaving carrying a direction. I watched her from the window. The light swept past 4 on. 4 off. The Atlantic held its breath between swells. The foundation had been built to save a lighthouse. But lighthouses don't only save buildings. They save the people who can see them. December 14. My 69th birthday. 1 full year. I climbed the 26 steps to the lantern room alone. The stairs were iron. Spiral. Original 1858, repaired in July by Roland Pelletier, who'd replaced 3 corroded bolts and said nothing about the other 23 because they didn't need replacing, and Roland didn't talk about things that worked. I carried a thermos of Earl Grey. A blanket Ada had left folded on the reading room chair. And nothing else. No envelope. No petition. No legal pad. Just a woman and a staircase, and a light. The lantern room is 8 feet across. Glass on every side. The LED array rotates on a motor the size of a coffee can, and the beam reaches 19 nautical miles, far enough to find a boat in fog, far enough to bring someone home who didn't know they were lost. I sat on the floor. The glass was cold against my back. Below me. The Keeper's house was dark. The reading room closed. The wood stove banked. Dorothy's chair empty until Thursday. Beyond the house, the granite ledge dropped to the Atlantic. And beyond the Atlantic, there was nothing except the kind of darkness that doesn't frighten you once you've learned. It's just distance. Not absence. 1 year ago, I'd woken to cold sheets and a husband packing suitcases. I'd stood in a doorway and watched 40 years leave in a Ford F-250. I'd spent 36 hours unable to open an envelope. I'd believed that the silence in my house was the silence of a woman who had nothing left. I was wrong. The silence was inventory. The silence was the house settling after a load had been removed, not a load that supported anything, but a load that had been pressing down for so long, I'd mistaken the pressure for structure. Walter was not my foundation. Walter was the weight on my foundation. And when he left, the house didn't collapse. The house breathed. I poured tea. The steam rose and vanished against the cold glass. The light swept past 4 on, 4 off, and I counted the way I'd always counted. Not because I needed to, but because rhythm is how I've always understood the world. Library shelves in dewy order. Marina invoices by quarter. Heartbeats. Tides. The steady interval of a light that doesn't stop because no one is watching. That's the lesson. I think. Not the fraud. Not the courtroom. Not the 12 counts, or the 7-0 vote, or the $843,000. The lesson is this: you do not need someone to watch you to keep burning. The light swept. The tea cooled. The Atlantic moved beneath me in the ancient rhythm of something that has never once asked for permission to continue. Neither would I. I came down from the lantern room at midnight. The stairs rang under my feet, iron on iron. The sound of a bell nobody needed to hear but the building made anyway. Because that's what structures do. They resonate. Whether or not anyone is listening, Ada had left a birthday card on the reading room table. Inside, her small, square handwriting, Helen, you gave me a coat on a pier. I gave you a phone number. Look what we built. Happy birthday. A. Beside the card, a cinnamon donut from Jordan's on Cottage Street. Wrapped in wax paper. Still warm. She must have driven it over while I was upstairs. 76 years old. A woman whose son stole $170,000 from her. Who'd had her car keys taken, and her house sold, and her independence boxed into a beige building with identical windows. And she'd driven through December darkness to leave a donut and a card for someone she'd known for exactly 1 year. That's what survival looks like. Not the courtroom. Not the verdict. Not 12 counts, or 7 votes, or $843,000 recovered. Survival looks like a warm donut on a cold table. Left by someone who remembered your birthday, because remembering is an act of defiance against every person who ever made you feel forgettable. I ate the donut, washed my hands, turned off the reading room light, locked the keeper's house door, a new lock, installed by Hank. Because some doors deserve protection. Outside. The lighthouse beam swept the Atlantic. Four on. Four off. Steady. Patient. Visible for 19 miles in every direction. Reaching into darkness not to conquer it, but to say I'm here. If you need me, I'm here. My name is Helen Callahan. I am 69 years old. I am a librarian. A director. A keeper. And as of last Tuesday, when I typed the final sentence on a laptop from the Best Buy in Bangor, a novelist, my husband stole $843,000 from me. My town helped me take it back. My lighthouse helped me remember why. If you're standing on a pier right now, if someone has forged your name, or frozen your savings, or told you that your signature doesn't matter, I need you to hear this. The people who love you do not get to use you as collateral. You are not a co-signer on someone else's life. You are the light. You are the keeper. And you do not stop burning because the room is dark. You burn because the room is dark. If this story helped you, please subscribe. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment. Tell me your story. You are not alone.